What would you do if you found yourself reborn into the world of Naruto? Here we find Fiona Yuki born into the Yuki clan in the Hidden Mists during the Third Great Ninja War. See his new life unfold with his upbringing in the Bloody Mist village. How will he affect the Naruto world, and will his presence change anything? Yes, this is a self-insert I hope you enjoyed, but before we get into it, like the video, subscribe to the page and hit that naughty bell. And shout out to Lovelord115, the author of this amazing fanfiction. Check out the link in the description for the original story.
Hey Ross, sauce it up.
What does it mean to be truly strong? To have power I thought I had known. I had spent my whole life thinking I was strong, that I was powerful. Only to have it all taken away in a single moment. My day has started like any other. I woke up, went about the normal morning routines most adults had. I had a shower, brushed my teeth, you know, the usual. I had a list of small jobs and bits that I had to do for the day. First on the list was to pop over to the bank and deposit some money, next was food shopping and so on. Nothing was out of the ordinary, nothing seemed off. It was just another day. I arrived at the bank and joined the queue. I didn't like waiting, but I like to think of myself as a nice guy, even letting an older lady in front of me because she seemed in a hurry. Today was going to be no different, I had thought to myself. Well, that was where I was wrong. I noticed a hooded man pacing outside of the window. He looked flustered. It was finally my turn in the long line that had formed, and the lady behind the desk snapped me out of my staring as she asked how she could help me. I gave her a normal smile before I started to speak, but I didn't hear my own words. Get on the fucking ground now. Screams erupted from most of the people there, and I turned to see what was happening. It was the hooded man who had been pacing outside. He was holding a gun pointed and walking towards me. I quickly put my hands up and stepped to the side slowly as he glanced at me and then to the lady at the desk. Put the money in the bag. Come on, move it, he shouted as he threw a small duffel bag at her. He was shaking and jittery. I know I shouldn't have done what I did next, but I did it anyway. My body just moved. Closing the small distance between me and the thug, I quickly punched him in the face. Grabbing the gun in his hand, I twisted it up and pulled it out of his hand. He struggled and grabbed me with his free hand, trying to claw at my face. I dropped the gun and acted on instinct. Headbutting him in the face to stun and knocking him off balance, I quickly used my strength and threw the man over my shoulder hard into the ground. Other people were still screaming, and some even ran out of the bank quickly. Of course, some had already gotten their phones out and started to record the whole thing. I hit the man so hard in the face that his hat bounced off of the floor and he stopped moving. I slowly stood up and shouted for someone to call the police, thinking it was all over. I had trained in martial arts my whole life. I had been in many a fight and even fought in the ring and other competitions. But this was the first time I had fought someone with a gun. My adrenaline was pulsing and the rush was unreal. It was hard to even breathe at the moment, but it was over, wasn't it? I saw the man move and then it hit me. The gun. I had completely forgotten where it had gone. I tried to move as fast as I could, but as I took my second step, bang. From what I could tell, the shot had hit me in my chest. I was choking on my own blood. I knew that much as I was pretty used to the taste. My arms and legs were going cold, and the screams and sirens in the distance started to fade. Why did I try and play the hero? Should I have just let him take the money? I was pretty sure it was insured anyway. If only I had been stronger, if only I had more power. I should have killed him before he killed me. All these thoughts were flooding my head as my blood flooded the floor. What happens now was my final thought as darkness was starting to take over. My eyes were closing, and I no longer had the strength to fight it. The light faded, and I slowly took my last breath. I slowly woke to raised voices around me. One sounded like a man and another like a woman. The room was dark and it took my eyes a second to adjust to the candlelight's glow. I won't let you kill him. He is my baby, the woman's voice said, shouting. I tried moving but didn't seem to have much luck. Just what the hell is happening? Where am I? I thought as the voice got louder. He is a curse to this clan. I should never have let you keep him during your pregnancy. I didn't really understand what the hell was happening. I slowly managed to look down towards my own body. My head weighed a ton, and it took all my strength. To my horror, my body was tiny. Am I a baby? What the fuck is happening? I tried moving and shouting out, but my tiny body had no strength. As for my voice, all I was able to do was cry or scream. So that's what I did. The voices got louder again. That's enough, I will put an end to this monstrosity in an instant. The man's voice said in anger. If you want to kill him, you must kill me first. I stopped trying to scream as it was starting to hurt my throat. Were they talking about me? Is this man trying to kill me? That's what the hell is happening. I thought I had already died. I couldn't really see what was going on for the cot I assumed I was in as it was blocking my vision. But I could feel the tension in the air. You know what his father was. How can you protect him after what he did to you? The man's voice said in empathy. The tension in the room settled a little, and it felt like the pressure did too. This baby is not his father. He cannot. No, I will not let him be blamed for his actions. You know what he will become. The mist will turn him into a weapon, or they will kill him out of fear. He has no future. It was silent for a moment before the woman spoke. As long as I live, no one will touch my son. Is this really happening? This was the kind of thing you used to read in a made-up story or watch in a funny anime. But this was real, and it certainly didn't look like heaven. The woman walked into my view and smiled down at me. He is the unwanted snow. My fine Yuki. I had so many questions about this whole thing. What I was guessing was my mother in this world picked me up and held me tight. She was pretty, very pretty. She smiled at me and I couldn't help smile back. She looked at the man and put a hard face back on. No one touches him. I turned my small hat so I could look at the man who had only a few moments ago been threatening my life. He seemed older than the woman holding me, as his hair was starting to gray. From what I could piece together, he wasn't my father. He looked at me with a cold chill in his eyes, and then back to my new mother. Very well, Kachina, he said before turning his back. From this day he is fine of the Yuki clan. With that said, B walked out of the room, leaving me and Kachina alone. Wait a minute, where I had heard that word from before. Time passed very slowly for me in my current body. Being trapped in the body of an infant with the mind of a 25-year-old was like being waterboarded. The only person I got to see was Kachina. When I wasn't trying to roll around, I was driving myself crazy trying to contemplate what the hell had happened to me. It was especially hard with no information to go off other than the inside of the house. I really had no idea where I was. My daily routine consisted of being fed from the breast of my new mother, which was weird, to say the least. I got my nappy changed twice a day, as I had no control over any of that either. Sometimes Kachina would play with me, but it never lasted for that long. Most of my time was spent reflecting what had happened to me and how any of this made sense. But the more I thought about it, the more it didn't make sense. Time continued to pass in a blur, the same thing day in and day out. No one else ever came back with Kachina, but that didn't really bother me. Pretty soon I found myself crawling around and even managed to take a few steps. My little legs were still not strong enough to support me yet, but crawling would do for now. Time seemed to pass by, and before I knew it I was celebrating my 4th birthday. I could walk, run and even talk at this point. I had decided to be smart about what I said, and how I said it. I didn't need any unwanted attention at such a young age. Once I had been able to walk, my mother had taken me out with her. I still remember the first time I went outside. Our house was a small cabin, and we lived in a small settlement called the Yuki clan. The small village was covered in snow, but that made it look beautiful. I still hadn't figured out what the Yuki meant yet, as every time I asked, Kachina always said when you're older. My days were spent learning to read and write as my mother would teach me. As luck would have it, everyone spoke English. So speaking was easy. Learning to read and write was a little trickier as it was in another language. I had always tried to act my age, but I still slipped up a few times. Kachina always gave me a surprised look when I said or did something that was beyond my years. She was a pretty woman with long black hair like silk. Her eyes were blue like the ocean and her skin white like the snow on the ground. She never said anything but just smiled and said, "You are a bright child." I had also discovered who the man was who wanted to kill me when I was what I assumed reborn. He was actually my grandfather, Kachina's father. His name was Shimo Yuki, and from what I could see he was the clan leader. Everyone else respected him and did what he said. I was one of the only children in our small settlement. I wasn't allowed to play with the others though. I didn't really care. Playing with kids when you were mentally 25 would have been strange to me anyhow. As time continued to pass me by, I was allowed to go out on my own. No one really bothered with me, but I didn't care. I spent most of my time wandering around the outskirts of the settlement. It was located high in the mountains, which was why we had snow all year round. I had started to learn more about my new world, and as it turned out I already knew quite a bit about it already. It took me a little while to piece it together, the thought that I was crazy coming to mind quite often. But it all made sense. I was part of the Yuki clan of the Land of Water. One of 5 great nations, and we served the feudal lords in the Mizukage. I almost had a panic attack at the information I had learned. Naruto was one of my favorite animes, and I had often thought how cool it would have been to be able to do jutsu. It would seem my wish had come true. Late one night I was woken to voices coming from the kitchen of our small cabin. It was Kachina's voice, and if I remembered correctly, Shimo, I said under my breath. He was nothing like my grandfather had been in my past world. He was cold and hard. Never praising me, in fact, he never paid any attention to me if I remembered correctly. The time has come, Kachina. You know our clan rules. Shimo said. Being as quiet as I could, I peeked through my bedroom door. The room was lit by candlelight, but I had gotten used to seeing in the dark. I know father, but what if he? She was cut off. There are no buts. If he has inherited the KekkaiGenkai, it is the law. He's too young to be sent there, Kachina said, her face looking worried. War is on the brink. And Lord Mizukage has requested all clans to prepare warriors for battle, including children aged 5 and above. He will be tested and sent to the academy. It is the law. Kachina's face was filled with horror. Curse Mizukage. And curse the bloody mist, they should fight their own wars. Her voice was raised now, but she sat back down in defeat. Shimo stood up and unfolded his large arms. Bring him to me tomorrow. He walked out of the house and Kachina didn't move. I decided this was a good time to sneak back to bed and think about what I had overheard. Or, that's what he had said. The only problem was I had no idea where in the Naruto story I was. It was so much to process and still didn't feel real at times. But it was. It was as real as a slap to the face. I raised my own hand in front of my face. It was still small, the hand of a child. Why am I here? I said to myself before I drifted off to sleep. The next day came way too fast as I was woken by Kachina. She didn't look like she usually did. Her face was bleak and void of expression. I decided to ask if she was okay. She gave me a forced smile and nodded. It was one that grown-ups gave to children when something was wrong. I had seen it all too much in my old world. We ate breakfast and not long after I was taken to the largest building in our settlement. It was Shimo's house. I guess being the clan leader had its perks. Even though he was my blood-related grandfather in this world, I had never been here before. After hearing how he wanted to kill me all those years ago, I always guessed he didn't like me. We walked through the house and outside to the back. It was rather large and in the middle Shimo was waiting with a handful of others. This wasn't looking good. It looked like I was going to be tested, and it didn't look like it was going to be easy. Kachina bowed to the group of men and I did the same. They returned the greeting and gestured that I come closer. I looked at Kachina and she nodded, a fake smile on her face, as if she was trying to tell herself it would be alright. I gulped and stepped forward, stopping a few feet away from Shimo. I stood strong and looking into his eyes, not breaking my gaze. He stepped forward and his gaze became cold. Do you know why you are here, boy? He asked. I nodded, still not breaking my gaze. He unfolded his arms. He gave an order to one of the others, and they placed a large bowl of water at my feet. He spoke once more. If you can move the water in that bowl without touching it, you pass. I didn't quite understand, but at the same time, I did. They wanted to see if I had the KekkaiGenkai, the Yuki clan. The ice release. I looked at the still water in the bowl by my feet. I didn't know what to do, so I just held my hand over it. I looked at the water hard and willed it to move. To my surprise, it did. I moved the water from side to side and then willed it to come to me. The water rose in the air and formed a ball between my hands. I looked at Shimo and he looked at me with a small grin. It was the first time he had ever even shown any kind of expression other than anger or disapproval towards me. He looked over to a wooden post and back to me. I understood what he wanted me to do. I raised my hand and slashed it down towards the wooden post. The water formed a sharp blade and froze. It sliced through the post like butter. This was amazing. I felt amazing. This was power. This was what true power felt like. I turned back to Shimo, who smiled. But Kachina dropped to her knees with tears running down her cheeks. No, I won't let them take him. He's too young. Kachina screamed as the others held her back. Shimo placed a hand on my shoulder and started to walk me away. I looked back at Kachina. She was in pain. Not physical but deep inside. No, I won't let you, she shouted. Breaking free of one of the men's grip on her arm, she started making hand signs with one hand. The other man quickly let go and jumped out of the way. Ice spikes rose up from the ground all around her, and would have skewered both men had they not evaded. She charged, moving like the wind towards Shimo, and pulled out a kunai as she did. Shimo blocked the kunai with ice he had created around his hand like a blade. Kachina. How dare you, you know the laws. She didn't care, all she wanted was not to lose me. Even in this world, mother's love was unbreakable. I wouldn't let them have him, to be used as a weapon. I wouldn't let him. She pulled back from Shimo, flipping backward as she did. She made a number of hand signs too quick for me to follow, and ice spears formed around her. I couldn't see Shimo's face, but his aura said it all. Very well, you leave me no choice. He flipped both hands down towards the floor. Ice formed around his forearms and hands like blades. The two of them clashed, ice shattering on ice. So this is what a battle between two powerful KekkaiGenkai users looked like. I thought to myself. It was beyond anything I had ever seen. No one could move that fast in my world, and no one could use ice like that either. Kachina was trying her best, but Shimo was clearly stronger. The ice on his arms' blades had blood on them now. It was Kachina's blood. This is your last chance. I don't wish to kill you, Kachina. He said, his voice stern. Kachina was breathing heavily now. The blood loss was starting to take its toll. She still had a defiant look on her face though. I won't stop. I thought I told you. While I live, I will not let anyone take him away from me. Shimo gave a heavy sigh. You leave me no choice, Kachina. He vanished in an instant, taking her back and slamming a kick into the middle of it. She flew through the air and landed hard on the ground a few feet from me. I looked down at her and then up at Shimo. Was he going to kill her? His own daughter. This woman had cared for me, provided for me for the last 5 years. Although she didn't replace my mother from my old life, she came pretty close. Shimo was standing over her now, his arm raised. I had to do something, anything. I couldn't let her die like this. Without thinking, I dashed forwards, willing myself to move. Somehow I made it in time, standing in front of Kachina, my arm raised to block Shimo's slash. No. Kachina screamed. Time seemed to slow down again. Had I really done the same thing again? I had jumped into death's embrace for a second time. No, I wouldn't let it happen again. Not again. Shimu's ice blade hit my forearm and to my surprise stopped dead. His face was twisted in anger and horror. To my own surprise, I had managed to stop his attack without losing my arm. I looked a little closer and noticed that 3 white bones were protruding from my arm. That was what had stopped Shimu's ice blade. It was a bone. I pushed forwards and managed to push Shimu back while he was still in a state of shock. I looked at my own arm. It didn't hurt at all, even with 3 large bones sticking out of it. I didn't have to think too hard about it, and the bones slowly started to return into my skin like it was never there. I looked behind me at Kachina. Her face was full of dismay, and she looked down towards the ground. I turned to look at Shimu. His face was void of expression. The others around us started to whisper, and one word caught my attention. Kagaya. Shimu raised a hand to silence them before he spoke. You see, Kachina, I warned you of this. He has not only inherited our Yuki clan's KekkaiGenkai, but the monstrosity of the Kagaya. Just like his infernal father. The sad truth is that he is nothing other than the perfect weapon. Kachina started to cry and gave out a scream. Shimu walked over to me slowly. Fiona Yuki. You are the curse of the Yuki clan. He turned his back and started to walk away. He leaves today, Kachina. That was the last time I saw Shimu. Kachina was taken away so her wounds could be tended to, and I was taken by 2 men I had only seen on my strolls through the village. Kagaya, it all made sense now. I knew what it was and how strong it was. Watching Naruto for all those years really did come in handy. What I didn't expect was the reaction from the others. Was this ability really so feared in this shinobi world? I had never been called a curse before. This was my life now, and as crazy as it seemed I had to endure it, these abilities I had been given may be a curse to others, but to me, it was a gift from the heavens. The trip lasted 2 days as we traversed through and down the mountain terrain. It would have gone much faster, but neither of the men was willing to carry me. I couldn't jump far or run up and down walls. After all, I was still only physically 5 years old. On top of that, I had no idea how to use any charka. It was the middle of the day when the village came into view. I recognized it from the pictures I had seen. It was a village hidden in the mist, KIRIGAKURE. Come on, kid, we are almost there. One of the men said, not even looking at me. Man, these guys really hated me. We walked towards the large gate and were stopped by hating Miss Shinobi. State your purpure, one of them said. I looked around and could count at least 20 guards around the wall and gate. They all had swords on their backs and wore the hating Miss flak jacket. It wasn't the most recent one I had seen in the anime. In fact, it looked older. To be honest, I had already pieced that together though. Given the fact the Yuki clan were still alive, the timeline must have been well before Naruto was born. We are from the Yuki clan. We have come to make our offering for the Mizukage. One of the men with me said. I noticed the looks the guards gave us. It wasn't just me either, they really didn't like us. Was a KekkaiGenkai really so feared here? Open the gate. The guard shouted as he stepped back, spitting on the ground. Let them in. I was escorted in by my fellow clan members and we started walking down the street. I could certainly see why it was named the village hidden by the mist. This village was nothing that the hidden leaf had looked like. No, that village was full of life, people walking the streets, chatting and going about their daily life. This place was the complete opposite. The stone buildings were run down, not many people on the streets at all, and the ones that were looked to be in a rush to get off of them. I had never really seen much on this village other than the large building in the middle. I guess that was where we were heading. After walking through the village, we finally arrived. We were escorted inside and up a couple of flights of stairs. There were no windows inside this building. Only one way in and one out. We entered a large stone room that was lit by gas lamps. 2 rows of guards lined a square shoji of translucent paper. I could see the silhouette of a person sat inside, and I bet he was important. The 2 men kneeled down and pushed my head to do the same. One of the shinobi spoke through the paper wall in a whisper I couldn't hear. He knelt back down, and a deep voice spoke from behind the shoji. Welcome, members of the Yuki clan. The voice spoke. The man to my right raised his head and also spoke. Thank you, Lord Mizukage. We have come with our offerings for the academy. I could feel the eyes of everyone in the room full on me. Most of all the Mizukage I couldn't see. Suddenly his deep voice spoke again. Come closer, child. I looked at my fellow Yuki clan members, and they both nodded. I stood up and walked slowly over towards the shoji. One of the shinobi raised a hand. That's close enough. I stopped and tried to get a better look at the shadow behind the paper wall. If I could just get a look at the Mizukage's face, it would help me place the timeline of this world. Not that it really mattered. I was pretty sure my presence in this world wouldn't change much. Suddenly the shoji door opened and all the shinobi in the room quickly lowered their heads in surprise. I wasn't sure what to do and lowered my head in a bow, keeping my eyes fixed on the man. He had long black hair with small beads running through it. It was the 3rd Mizukage. You wish to see my face, child? He said with a questioning look on his. Oh shit. I didn't think he would have realized. He walked a full circle around me and sat back down on his chair. You amuse me, child. How old are you? He asked, a small grin on his face. I didn't look up as I answered his question. 5, sir. It was silent for a moment before he spoke again. Is Shimori really okay with this? He is very young. The Mizukuge spoke, directing his question to the two of the Yuki clan members. One of them spoke without hesitation. Yes, my lord. This one is gifted. The Mizukuge looked from him and back to me. I could feel the chill his gaze gave as it was fixed on me. Is that so? It was silent once more before he clapped his hands together. Very well. I trust that old goat Shima. If he thinks he is ready, then I will take him. But you know I can't promise that he will survive. My fellow Yuki members didn't even look up. Of course, Lord Mizukuge. You may leave now. The Mizukuge said after a moment. I could feel his gaze on me even after I left the room. It was frightening. I was handed over to two hidden mists ninja, the Yuki members, not even so much as saying goodbye. I didn't care, I was pretty strong emotionally. I was escorted to a large barracks. Here I was given new clothes and a name tag. The clothes consisted of a black training shirt and black training pants. After I had changed into them, I was taken to a classroom and left on my own. The room was full of other kids all older than me. They had the same clothes on that I did. I guess it was a generic protocol. I took an empty seat and decided to keep to myself. They didn't look like a friendly bunch anyway. Pretty soon a man entered the room. He was clearly a ninja with the clothes he was wearing, but the hidden mist headband gave it away. Alright, you sorry lot, take your seats and shut it if you know what's good for you. Everyone quickly did as he said, and the room fell silent. My name is Hadaka. You will address me as sensei. Is that understood? The class answered with a loud yes, sensei. And he seemed pleased. Welcome to the Academy of the Bloody Mist Brats. My vision of what a ninja academy was like was pretty spot on. However, the brutality of it was not. First thing in the morning we had strength training. This consisted of running many miles around the large training field. Some would even pass out from lack of exhaustion. Of course, the instructors didn't care and just left them there. Weakness was not allowed here. We also had to complete basic bodyweight exercises such as press-ups, sit-ups, and a number of other exercises. I was one for training, but doing this every day was child abuse. After that we had breakfast. It was the most basic food you could imagine, but it was better than nothing. Next, we found ourselves in the classroom where we were taught the basic of chakra control. What it was used for, how to use and apply it. We were taught hand signs and made to practice them religiously. We were also taught about the history of our village and the other great nations, as I expected they were brainwashing us from an early age. Next was lunch, and it was pretty much the same as breakfast. We were each given our small rations consisting of bread, some water, and 2 ration bars. I don't know what they had in them, but I was guessing it was everything the body needed. After lunch, we had jutsu practice. I found this relatively easy thanks to my private knowledge and time spent training in my old world. We were taught basic stances and strikes, basic forms and drills. It was pretty much what I had expected for a basic jutsu class, as they called it. It soon became more brutal than I could have anticipated though. We were forced to fight each other until one couldn't fight anymore. How we went about it didn't matter to the instructor either. I was able to beat everyone there despite the age difference. My knowledge and experience were too great. After all, I was fighting 8-year-old children. I managed to submit all of them and didn't cause any serious harm to them. Others, however, had been knocked out, and one had even had his arm snapped. It was vicious, but I had to keep going. The only other choice was to give up and die. After the taijutsu, we had shuriken practice. The ones who had been injured or unable to continue had been carried off to the medical unit to treat their injuries. It would seem they were not as cruel as I had first thought, and at least treated them. I doubt they could be seen throwing away our cures for the war effort so soon. Throwing shuriken wasn't all that difficult. They had a good weight to them and sailed through the air smoothly. Getting a good grouping was more challenging though. After hours of practice, we were taken back for our last meal. It was the same again, but this time we had a small bowl of rice each. It was plain of course, but I was just thankful it wasn't more soggy bread. After we had eaten, we had to go back to our rooms. We didn't get our own room, no, it was a 16-man cell. We each had a small futon and 1 set of drawers. We were not encouraged to chat amongst ourselves and had a set lights out time. If you were caught not sleeping, then you were beaten to set an example. It was very military and rigorous. But then again, what had I expected of a ninja village called the Bloody Mist? I knew exactly why it was called that too. We all did. That was why no one really spoke to each other. No one was willing to form bonds of friendship when you might have to kill that person at the end. We were being trained as emotionless tools for killing and nothing more. The next 3 years followed the same routine. It just got harder though. The number of laps increased each month, and so did the number of exercises. Our taijutsu got more advanced each year, and so did the brutality. It was not uncommon for the odd individual to be killed in the matches, especially if you let your guard down. After all, they were training killers. As our chakra control got better, everything seemed to get easier. We could use our chakra to boost our physical strength and speed, allowing us to continue training for hours. We had been given exams on the knowledge we had learned in the classroom, and those that had failed were met with strict punishment. I had found out that our training lasted for 3 years at this academy, and we were quickly approaching the final test. We had been taught no ninjutsu, other than how to make clones and substitutions. They were nothing more than a simple illusion and not solid at all. Not like shadow clones anyway. I was now 8 years old. The time had seemed to all blend into one. We were not given time to think, nor were we allowed to think for ourselves. I had also decided to keep my KekkaiGenkai abilities a secret from the other students. My name didn't really help though, and some of the other kids had heard of the name Yuki. After all, it was a powerful clan in the land of water. The only time I got to myself was the little bit before I fell asleep each night. I used that time to concentrate on using my other abilities. I found that by using my chakra control, I could manipulate my bones, changing them in my body and moving them at my will. I could make new ones, stronger ones, even cover the underlayer of skin in a layer of bone-like armor. It was a very powerful ability. If I remembered correctly, Kimimura was very powerful, and even Gaara had struggled to survive against him. My thoughts often drifted to what happened in Naruto early on. If I was correct, we were currently in the middle of the Third Great Ninja War. The village was busy and ninja would come and go, sometimes even our instructor would change overnight. We weren't told the details, but we managed to overhear the odd bit about what was happening beyond our village. A few more weeks passed and I soon found myself at the final exam. All of the classes were gathered. There must have been over 250 students. Of course, each class was split to only hold 30-ish students at a time, and we never got to see the others except for meal times. The air was tense. Every one of us knew what was going to happen. Even after all the training, all the emotional and physical stress, could I really do it? Could I kill these children? Most of them had been orphans or born to the lower families of the land of water. In times of war, it was requested that all able children of the age of 8 had to be sent to the academy, with a few exceptions like clans who had to offer up children, so they could keep in an alliance with the village. I was snapped out of my thoughts when the head instructor of the academy stood on a small podium. Each and every one of you has proven you have what it takes to become shinobi. But you are yet to face your final test. This will see who among you will become Blood Mist Shinobi. He raised his arm and the mist cleared. We had been gathered at a large stadium and it was filled with spectators. Even the Mizukichi had come to watch the event. They were treating our deaths as a spectacle. It was sickening. The Mizukichi spoke, his voice demanding the attention of everyone. I look forward to seeing how our new recruits will fare. Remember, you served me and the Bloody Mist. Do your nation proud this day and show your capability. His words seemed to encourage most of the students who were eager to prove themselves. The head instructor gave a nod, and the other instructor covered us in a large spread-out circle. It seemed as if they were there to stop anyone from trying to run. This is madness, I thought. Suddenly a rain of kunai fell from the sky, and landed scattered across the what was about to become a battlefield. A small few who had not paid attention had been hit by a couple and lay dead on the ground. The realization of what was about to happen becoming clear to everyone. You may begin. The Mizukichi said. The area around me erupted. Students were rushing to the closest kunai trying to gain the advantage. Screams filled the air as the battle was underway. It was an all-out battle royal. The people you had trained with, eat with and even shared a room with. They were now your enemy. I didn't move for a little while. I just watched what was unfolding around me, frozen in disbelief. I don't know when it happened, but my body took over. Someone had tried to attack me and I just moved. It was such a simple movement too, a simple sidestep, followed by a slash of my arm to the boy's neck. The bone-shaped blade in my hand covered in the blood of this child. He was so young, still older than me physically, but to me, he was nothing more than a child. This world was cold, colder than anything I had ever known. There was nothing I could do. Nothing at all. Survive, that is what I had told myself. I would survive no matter what. I will survive. I screamed as I entered the fray of battle. I went on a rampage. All of the hate I had bottled up until this point exploded out of me like a river of darkness. I cut them down one after the other. No one could stop me. I was like a demon. Jumping into the air, I slashed down, killing another boy with ease, as my bone blade cut straight through the kunai in his hand. I used my chakra to empower my movements, and I quickly became a whirlwind of death. I must have killed at least 50 of them now. Boys and girls, it didn't matter. All that mattered was that I live. Nothing else. It was then that I noticed him. He looked just a little older than me, but not by much. His face was like mine. A demon in the mist, the only difference was that he seemed to enjoy it. He cut through the others with ease, a kunai in each hand, wielding them with skill. His eyes fixed on me and me alone. He was a true demon. I could see his aura like it was above his head, looking at me fiendishly. He charged at me, covering the distance quickly, thrusting a kunai at my face as he spun onto his knee, twisting his arm, aiming for my body. I dodged the first attack and grabbed his wrist from the second one. He was strong. Not 1 second after I had a hold of him, his foot struck me in the chest, and if not for my reinforced bones, the strike would have broken my ribs. I couldn't help but give a smile. He did the same. Slowly he walked backward, disappearing into the mist and out of my sight. I decided to let him go and turned around, ready to defend myself. Stop. A deep voice shouted. It was the Mizukichi, and everyone quickly halted from the sound alone. The mist around the battleground faded, and the piles of dead children scattered was inhumane. Out of the 200+ students that had started the exam, only around 50 were left standing. The Mizukichi pointed to the boy who I had clashed with and spoke again. Bring that one to me. The adult instructors quickly manhandled him and disappeared. As for the rest of us, we were lined back up, standing over our fallen classmates and covered in their blood. The Mizukichi spoke again. Congratulations, you are all members of the Blood Mist Village. The words seemed to lift the mood of the others. I guess they didn't care that they had killed the others. I pushed it to the back of my mind. I couldn't think about that now. If I did, it would consume me. We were escorted off by the other instructor and taken to a shower room. I sat soaking in the warm water as the blood that had clung to me slowly washed away. I let out a small sob and tears followed. I thought I was emotionally strong, but this was something else. I had become a killer of children, and killers didn't cry, did they? The word has spread like wildfire, the boy who had killed over 100 students. It was rare to have just one person kill so many by themselves. What had really shocked everyone was that the boy wasn't even a student of the academy. The Mizukichi himself had interrogated the boy. Zabuza Mamachi was his name. It was all starting to fall into place now. The timeline was starting to make sense, as Zabuza was a little older than me, and that meant that I was only a year or two younger than Kakashi. Not long after my breakdown, the survivors and I had been gathered and handed our hidden mist headbands. I counted 51 students in total. It was no hidden fact that this year's numbers had been low. All thanks to the arrival of Zabuza, I had no doubt, at least not long after this, they would be done with the barbaric graduation exam and change their ways. The head instructors and others had not just been watching to make sure no one tried to run away. They had been observing our strengths and our weaknesses. Each student was placed in an area where their strengths had seemed strongest. The categories listed as followed: Taijutsu, Ninjutsu, Jinjutsu, and Kenjutsu. Most students were placed into just one other category. Everyone was placed into Kenjutsu though. KIRIGAKURE was known for his famous swordsman after all. Only 10 students were placed into 3 or more categories, me being one of them. Fionayuki, Kenjutsu, Taijutsu, and Jutsu. The instructor called out. I was moved into the small section of students that had been placed into more than 2 categories, while the others were organized into their own sections. It turned out even though we had become genin, we still had 3 weeks left at the academy. They called it the advanced classes, and they called them that for a reason. We were given no time to rest, no time to celebrate our promotion. We were straight back to training. The hidden mist had taken heavy losses during the war so far, and the village needed more soldiers and fast. Smaller conflicts and skirmishes around the land of water and its neighbors were also taking place, and the need for soldiers was increasing. We quickly fell into a routine just like we had in our basic training, as it was referred to. First was Kenjutsu practice. Every student was in attendance, and the silence was painful as we waited for our instructor. We were all gathered in a large hall. It was quite a strange one, as it had a large stone walkway in a full square around the diameter of the training ground. The lower level was all water, and it was at least waist height. The large doors opened, crashing off the walls like they had been kicked. The students cleared the way as a large slender man walked past them to the front. He had a huge sword on his back which I recognized right away. He had no eyebrows, creases under his eyes, and a cross-shaped scar on his right cheek. The most noticeable thing about him was the red grit-shaped marking covering his jaw. His gaze was heavy as he looked all of us up and down. Right, you sorry shits, get yourself a training sword and follow me. The man jumped down and landed on the water, standing on it using his chakra. Everyone quickly grabbed one of the training swords and jumped down into the water. I was right, it had been about waist height. None of us could stand on the water using our chakra yet, and we were all forced to withstand the chill of the cold. My name is Yuzabiwa, one of the 7 swordsmen of the mist. Everyone broke out into whisper. It was well known that the 7 swordsmen of the mist were extremely powerful ninja. In fact, their power and position in the village was second only to the Mizukichi himself. Juzo scoffed at the fact none of us could walk on the water yet, his smile fading fast. The Mizukichi has asked that I don't kill any of you, but I don't give a rat's arse about whether you live or die. Now I want all of you to come at me. You can attack one at a time or all at once, it doesn't matter. If you don't keep your guard up you might die. No one moved for a few seconds. I was pretty sure if he really wanted to he could kill us all. My memory about him was fuzzy at best, but the fact he had the executioner's blade before Zabuza said it all. Suddenly one of the students flew through the air, his sword raised for an attack. It was Zabuza. Juzo blocked his attack like it was nothing, kicking him so hard in the chest that he flew into 5 of the other students, knocking them down into the water. Everyone roared and charged in for an attack on Juzo. He was using the blunt edge of his giant blade to block an attack. Even though it wouldn't cut you, the weight of the blade itself could still kill if it hit in the right place. Juzo blocked and dodged every attack that came his way. His speed, strength, and skill were way beyond any of our own. This was the power of one of the 7. It was incredible. I followed 2 others around to his left flank. Moving in the water made life hard work, but with the use of our chakra control, we could still move at a decent pace. The 2 boys charged in for the attack, one jumped high and the other went in low. It was a perfect team attack even if it was unplanned. Juzo instantly spun around, blocking both attacks at once with his large blade. He punched the boy who was still falling through the air, sending him flying backward. Then using the blade he pulled himself off the ground, spinning a powerful kick into the boy's ribs, breaking them on impact, and sending him crashing into the wall. This is my chance, I thought as I moved in to attack Juzo while he was still off his feet. Juzo pulled himself out of the way, landing and spinning around for a counterattack. I blocked the hit, but the force took me off my feet, and I was sent sprawling backward. I recovered quickly, only to see Juzo holding his sword above me ready to attack again. "Not a bad effort, kid," he said as he swung the blade down. I lifted my sword up to block the strike, but his blade was too heavy and snapped mine in half, striking me on the shoulder. Luckily for me, I was able to block the strike with a few bones that had sprung out of my shoulder. Juzo looked shocked, and I quickly went on the counter-attack, pulling one of the bones fully out of my shoulder like a short sword, swinging it aiming for his stomach. Juzo quickly jumped back out of the way, pulling his blade up onto his shoulder. "So you're Kagaya," he said, his face still. His thoughts were interrupted as Zabuza suddenly sprang out of the water like a shark. His sword swung so close to Juzo's head I thought he had sliced it off. Juzo watched as a small piece of hair fall from his head and into the water. He looked at Zabuza and then back to me, a smile coming to his face as he did. "Looks like this year's genin aren't just cannon fodder," he said, pointing his sword at Yus. I looked around quickly to see how many of the others were left. Including myself and Zabuza, there were 10 of us left who could still fight. The others had been taken out of the water by some of the other instructors, who must have been watching from the shadows. "You don't have time to be looking around, kid," Juzo shouted as he appeared in front of me. When did he? I was snapped out of my thoughts when his kick collided with my chest. Even with the shield of bone spikes that had protruded out to block his attack, I had still been sent flying. Zabuza and 2 others attacked at the same time, but Juzo made short work of them, throwing them around like ragdolls. No one dared move or attack him, and so he decided to go on the offensive. "If no one wants to attack, then allow me," he shouted, running over to 2 of the others who were frozen in fear. Juzo used a front kick to the girl who slammed against the wall hard, coughing up blood into the water. He then swung a side swipe at the boy who, despite blocking the attack, was treated like a ragdoll as he swung through the air and bounced off of the water a few times before stopping. I could feel the pressure his aura was giving off. It felt dark and heavy, as if it were weighing me down. This was starting to get dangerous now. At first he had been toying with us and taking it easy, but now his bloodlust was showing, and his attacks were stronger. Someone could easily die if this carried on much longer. Juzo charged through the other students like a raging bull, a smile on his face as he did. He was running towards me now, and I could tell he meant business. I dodged the first swipe that was aimed at my head, ducking under the slash. I thrust forward with my bone blade. He dodged my strike and backhanded my forearm, causing me to drop my weapon. He spun the massive blade around with such grace and ease, and the second attack went low for my knees. I jumped spinning in the air, executing a butterfly kick, but as soon as I landed, another attack was already coming down at my head. Even if I reinforced my skull, the weight of the blade would knock me out for sure. I had to move, I had to do something. Suddenly Juzo stopped the attack and launched himself backward. It would seem that unconsciously I had frozen the water around me, and large spikes of ice had shot up all around me. Juzo had sensed the danger and avoided the surprise attack. "Ice," he said a little too loud. He pointed his blade at me, his razor-sharp teeth on show. "What is your name, kid?" he asked. "Fiona Yuki," I said, willing the ice to turn back to the water. Juzo laughed. "Yuki, you say? My oh my, what a strange one you are." His words were cut off as Zabuza tried another sneak attack. Juzo grabbed his wrist, spinning it around until Zabuza's sword was at his own throat. Juzo held him in this position for a moment until he let go and pushed him away. "Class is dismissed," he said as he walked away, placing his massive sword back on his back. I could feel the stares that the others were giving me. It was very uncommon to see someone with 2 KekkaiGenkais. Hell, in this village it was even rare to someone with just 1. Not long after Kinjutsu, the students who were able were sent to their next class. We were being forced to specialize in one area, all with the exception of a few of us. It made sense the more I thought about it. If they only had a small window of time to train ninja, then it was best to focus on their strongest abilities, and then mix-match them when forming squads. Our next class was Taijutsu. It was pretty much the same as our last Taijutsu class from the academy, but focused on the use of weapons, and aiming for the weakest areas of the body. The Taijutsu instructor was a small but built man. He had his headband around his forehead, and liked to twist one end of his large mustache. He was very strict when it came to our forms and technique, constantly saying the technique was more important than strength. It was true to an extent, but in this world, there was some ninja that Taijutsu technique just wouldn't cut it. After the Taijutsu practice, all except the 10 students who had not been picked to attend more than 2 classes were taken off to the classroom. The rest of us were escorted to our final lesson. 5 of us, including myself, were taken to the ninjutsu instructor and the others to the jinjutsu. Zabuza was one of the others who had also been selected for the ninjutsu class, along with 2 other boys whose name I did not know and 1 girl. Our instructor was a woman this time, and boy was she pretty. Well, if you could look past the filed teeth that most hidden miss ninjas seem to have. She started by giving each of us a small piece of paper. "Alright class, I want each of you to focus your chakra into the paper I have just given you. This will allow me to see what nature affinity you possess and work from there." She seemed far too cheerful for a hidden miss jonin, but hey, who was I to judge? Everyone poured their chakra into the paper, waiting to see what would happen. To no surprise of mine, Zabuza's paper went all soggy like it was soaked. The girl's paper slid in half, indicating she was a wind style user. One of the other boys jumped as his set on fire, and the others did the same as Abusa's. My own paper went soggy and then ripped. Of course, it was no surprise. After all, I had the ice release that used both water and wind combined. The instructor noticed each of our paper's effects and nodded with a smile. She walked over to me and gasped. "What do we have here?" she said as she took the wet paper from me. "It is very rare for a student to show 2 elements on their first paper test." I nodded and rubbed the back of my head. "I have a KekkaiGenkai sensei," I said, a small smile on my lips. She didn't seem surprised. "Well, that would make sense," she said as she walked back to the middle. Unlike most, she didn't give any hint that she cared. "Now begins your lesson. I want you to focus your chakra and combine it with hand signs to manipulate the element you are affiliated with." We all gave a nod and began. This was a great chance for me to practice using my ice style. I had been so busy in the academy that I had never had the chance to use it. Unlike my Kekkaiga abilities, which I could practice in secret without anybody knowing. We had been at it for hours now, and so far none of the others, well other than Zabuza, had made any progress. Zabuza had been able to form the water into a large ball, and then drop it back to the ground. The sensei was very impressed and had said that not many shinobi could learn to use an element on their first day. The others had not been so lucky, as none of them had even come close to showing any signs of their element. I had managed to do quite a lot, even experimenting with senjutsu. I had first formed blades of ice like I had seen Shimo do when he battled Kachina. Next, I found that my abilities allowed me to control water with the use of my chakra. Once I applied hand signs to it, the effort required was less, and the end result was stronger. It didn't go unnoticed that the others were jealous of me, but I didn't let it bother me. It really was a curse to be born without a KekkaiGenkai in this world, and I had been blessed with 2. After ninjutsu practice, we had been forced to practice our chakra control for another 2 hours. We were made to focus the chakra in our feet, more than any other place in our body. Once that was over, it was a late meal and then lights out. The 16 others I had shared a room with were all gone, now killed in the final exam. It was just me. I was the lone survivor, but that didn't matter, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Over my 3 years in the academy of this village, I had quickly learned that in this world strength was everything, and if my resolve meant anything, it was that I would be. The first 2 weeks of the advanced classes had flown by. Our Kenjutsu instructor had changed from Juzo to another Jonin ninja. Most of the students were happy about it, to be honest. Now the classes were spent learning forms and drills. We were made to spar, but had to use blunted swords to minimize the fatality rate. Some students had started to be able to stand on the water using their chakra. I had also managed to figure it out. After all, it was a very handy ability living in the land of water. Taijutsu was still the same, but the instructor had us battle in teams. This proved a new challenge, as you had to compensate for your teammate's ability. We were placed into 3-man squads made to battle until one team could no longer stand. We were not allowed to kill each other, but other than that there were no rules. I had been placed on a squad with one other boy and a girl. Their names were Kaido and Izumi. Kaido was older than me, being 11, and was quite large for his age. He had short but wild spiky black hair, and his teeth were filed like most mist ninjas. Izumi was also the same age, having started the academy at 8 years old. She was about the same height as me. Her hair was long, but she kept it tied back in a neat ponytail. Her teeth were also filed down, and she had a crazy look in her eye. Both of them had only been chosen for the Taijutsu class, meaning that this was their strongest attribute. The team we were facing consisted of Zabuza and 2 other boys whose names I had not taken the time to learn. They too had only been placed on the Taijutsu class, while myself and Zabuza had been placed on more. "Begin," the sensei shouted. Zabuza's team charged, and before I could come up with a plan, my teammates had already gone. Zabuza started by throwing 2 kunai at Kaido, who deflected them with good reflexes. Izumi and one of the boys from the other team locked into a clash of kunai, and started to compete in a power struggle. Kaido and Zabuza had also started to exchange blows, which meant my opponent was. I quickly spun around, dodging 2 shuriken as they flew past my face. "You," I said, a smile forming on my face. The boy was the average height for his age. He wore the standard black training clothes we still had to wear while in the academy, but he had tied his headband around his arm. He pulled out more shuriken, one in each grove of his knuckles. He threw them with great accuracy, aiming for vital points throughout my body. I charged straight down the center towards him, blocking the shuriken with bones coming out of each of my forearms. I closed the distance quickly and took him off guard. Flipping over the older boy, I landed behind him and kicked the back of his knee. The force of my kick dropped the boy hard onto the ground, causing him to lose his breath. Quickly rolling, I slammed my heel down onto his chest, finishing him off and taking him out of the fight. Meanwhile, Kaido and Zabuza were locked in fierce combat. Kaido was much stronger than Zabuza, and seemed to favor focusing his chakra into his fists as he attacked. Zabuza was faster than the large boy, and he used his speed to his advantage. He dodged 2 punches that had enough force to take his head off, and dropped down to one knee, as he shot into Kaido's left leg. Using the kunai in his hand, he slit the back of Kaido's leg, and quickly spun around to take his back for the final blow. Just as Zabuza kunai was coming down to stab Kaido in the back, I launched my own projectile. It was the distal phalanges, otherwise known as the fingertip bone. I had shooted out the tip of my index finger, just as I remembered Kimimaro had in the anime. The bone projectile struck Zabuza's kunai at the last second, taking it out of his hand and saving Kaido's life. Zabuza quickly moved back and created some distance as I ran over to Kaido's side. His leg was bleeding badly and he couldn't stand. As far as I was concerned, he was out of the battle. Izumi had not fared too well against her opponent either, as she landed hard on her back after taking a spinning heel kick to the face. She was struggling to try and get back up, but the boy sat on her chest and placed a kunai to her throat. "Give up," he said, fixing his eyes on hers. She had no choice and rose her hand in the air, signaling she had given up. The boy joined Zabuza's side, and the two began circling us like predators. Kaido tried to stand, but his leg was limp from the loss of blood, and he fell back to his knee. "You're out of this fight, Kaido," I said, my back facing him. I couldn't afford to take my eyes off the others, and I didn't know if I could protect Kaido. The larger boy nodded and raised his hand in defeat, taking himself out of the fight. Now it was 2-on-1, and my chances were looking slim. Ninjutsu was not allowed in the Taijutsu matches, which meant no ice style. Luckily for me, I could use my Shikatsu abilities for Taijutsu and not break the rules. I spun the kunai around in my hand and quickly grabbed it, holding it backward as I took a fighting stance. "Bring it," I said, taunting them with my free hand. The two charged in at me, both of them zigzagging as they did to confuse me. Zabuza struck first, and I blocked his kunai slash with my own kunai, the sound of metal on metal ringing in my ears. The force pushed me back, and I shuffled backward to create more space. Suddenly the other boy came from my right, slashing in multiple directions. I quickly ducked and weaved, avoiding two attacks before I blocked a big right hand. I grabbed his wrist and shot an elbow into his ribs, cracking them, quickly pulling his arm over my shoulder. I flipped him over and slammed him on the ground hard, knocking him unconscious. I didn't have time to even turn around as Zabuza took my back, thrusting his kunai into it. He didn't stop there as he jumped into the air, spinning around and slamming his heel into my head hard, knocking me to the ground. The rest of the class were silent as they watched what was happening and waited to see the outcome. To Zabuza's surprise, I stood back up unaffected by his blow. I had managed to stop the kunai with a layer of bone under the skin, where he tried to thrust it in. I had also reinforced my skull, and the force of his kick had done little more than knocking me off my feet. Still, his speed and ability were amazing, especially considering he hadn't even been trained at the academy. Still, I wasn't about to lose here. "Is it my turn now?" I said as I took a fighting pose. I crossed one foot behind the other and opened my arms out low to my sides. Bone spikes started to protrude from all over my body, and I must have looked like a porcupine. Zabuza took a low fighting stance, and his expression looked shocked. "Enough," the instructor shouted as he appeared in the middle of us. He gave me a hard look. "That's enough for today, you two. This fight is over." I allowed the bones to return back into my body and turned around. The look of all the other students was no surprise. They were whispering amongst themselves, and I swore I had heard someone call me a monster. It made sense, I suppose. The Kekkai clan had their own settlement away from the village, and they never sent students to the academy. Even more so, I had overheard some of the instructors speaking about my abilities, saying how rare it was to see. Thankfully, because I had been born into the Yuki clan, the Kagaya had no right over me, even though I passed their KekkaiGenkai. That was the way it worked around here, each clan and family falling into a social order. The main clans and families were the founding families of the Hidden Mist. They had their own clan members trained outside of the academy, and were exempt from the final test. After that, it was the clans that lived outside of the Hidden Mist. They had to make offerings to the Mist village, and were only useful in times of war. The last on the list was the families that had been forced to live in the Hidden Mist for protection, mostly members of fallen clans. They were what made up most of the Hidden Mist's military force, but were also seen as poor and just cannon fodder. If I remembered correctly, not long after this war, there would be a number of small civil wars, where most of the clans outside of the Hidden Mist would be killed. That also included the Yuki clan and the Kagaya clan. I wondered where I would fall into the equation and if my life would be threatened. I shrugged the thought off and headed to my next class, Ninjutsu. In the last 2 weeks, we had all been taught the Hidden Mist Jutsu, and how to operate in it. It made sense, of course. We did live in the village hidden in the mist. Along with the Hidden Mist Jutsu, we had also been taught a more advanced substitution jutsu. It would certainly come in handy for future battles. We had continued to learn and practice more jutsu involving our elements. I had been left alone mostly as my KekkaiGenkai abilities could not be taught by anyone other than those with the same abilities. Given that, I was still able to come up with a few new tricks, as well as figuring out some moves I had seen in the anime. Zabuza and the others had been given one basic jutsu to work on for their element. They had been shown the jutsu first, and then taught the hand signs. Zabuza, as expected, had learned his water style quite quickly, while the others came along more slowly. We were not allowed to practice our ninjutsu on each other, and were only allowed to use it against training dummies. Our training field was located on one of the academy's training fields outdoors. Learning the Hidden Mist Jutsu was very interesting. It allowed us to use our chakra to turn the moisture in the air into mist that spread out the more chakra you pumped into it. The mist was thick and clouded our enemies and our own vision. Our sensei said that if we focus our chakra in the mist, we could locate anyone who the mist made contact with. We could even sense our surroundings. It took some practice, but pretty soon we could all move quite freely in the mist. Zabuza seemed to take to it almost naturally, but I remembered he was famous for his silent killing art, which used the hidden mist jutsu a lot. Pretty soon our 3 weeks was up, and all of the students who had made it found themselves in the large announcement hall. Usually, the Mizukage was the one to give the ceremony, but he was currently out of the village on a top-secret S-rank mission. Instead, the head instructor of the academy and 2 of the Mizukage's advisors gave the speech. It was long-winded on how we had all proved our strength as hidden mist shinobi, and that we deserved to be here. I didn't really pay too much attention to it as I was too busy trying to think what was going to happen next. We will now announce your new position and assignments. Listen closely as I will not repeat myself, the instructor said. He began reading names on a large piece of paper and assigning them to positions or squad within the village. The first and most common position was a posting to the gate guard and village patrol. It was given to those who had scored the lowest. Next was an assignment to squads or regiments. This position was given to those who were believed to be ready for combat outside of the village, and it was considered a great honor. Out of the 51 students who had made it past the final exam, only 47 had made it to today. Out of the 47 students, only 7 had been placed on gate guard and the rest into units. A member of each of the units or regiments was present to collect those who had been assigned to them. They all looked battle-hardened and wore the standard hidden mist attire. My name was called and the room went silent. It would seem everyone was eager to see where I would be placed. Fionayuki. Assigned to frontline infantry unit. It was considered a death sentence among the other students. The frontline infantry unit was, as the name implied, frontline. They were always at the head of any major battle on the war front and usually acted as cannon fodder. I hadn't expected anything else. After all, I had not one but 2 KekkaiGenkais. I was even sure most of my clan members would also be in the same unit. Zabuza Momachi, assigned to the advanced sword unit. The advanced sword unit was the most sought-after position to be assigned, as the members of the unit were usually the ones who would become future members of the 7 Ninja Swordsmen, and in Zabuza's case, that was true. I didn't pay much attention to where the others had been placed, but I did know that none of them had been placed with me on the front lines. It was either a testament to my abilities or a death sentence for sure. I was collected by a hard-looking man who didn't look impressed when he saw me. "Follow me, kid," he said as he walked away. I followed him out of the hall and out of the academy. It was the first time in 3 years I had been outside of the academy's grounds. While we were in training, none of us had been allowed to leave and go into the village. It had been very strict, but now I couldn't help but feel free. The first place we went to was to the equipment barracks. This was where Ninja reported to for new weapons and clothing. They had everything from basic kunai and shuriken to explosive tags and scrolls. It was a pretty impressive collection. The man who I was with handed a piece of paper to the woman behind the desk, and she nodded, not a moment later returning with a pile of clothing and weapons. "Alright kid, this is your new equipment, put it on and we'll be on our way." I nodded and took the equipment off of the desk and went to get changed. I had been given an undershirt of mesh armor, along with a black long sleeve top and the standard grey hidden mist flak jacket, complete with a pair of black combat trousers, 2 weapon holders, one for my leg and one for my hip, and some standard footwear, as well as the signature pinstripe material for bracers and greaves which merged into my sandals. As for my weapons, I was given a good amount of kunai and shuriken, 5 explosive kunai and 2 scrolls that had more weapons sealed in them. It was a lot of gear and I took my time putting it on using the mirror that was provided. It was the first time I had seen my reflection since before I had joined the academy. I took a long hard look at myself, noticing the Kagaya markings on my forehead just like Kimimaro had. My hair was a jet black just like Kachina's had been. It had gotten somewhat long now and spiked more towards the right, with bangs hanging over either side of my headband that was around my head. My eyes were blue just like Kachina's were, but my skin had a slight tan to it. I guess I got that from my father, who I didn't know anything about other than the fact he must have been a member of the Kagaya clan. I was snapped out of my thoughts when my supervisor shouted through the changing cubicle. "Hurry it up, would you? We don't have all day," he said, letting out a sigh. I walked out dressed and ready to go. He actually gave a slight smile. "Now you look like a blood mist nin." We walked out of the equipment barracks onto the main road. The air was moist and filled with mist like usual. "Right, listen up kid, we have a full day's journey ahead of us to the border. There we will meet up with 3 battalions and cross the sea to the land of hot water. Once there we will act as reinforcements in the battle against the Hidden Leaf." I nodded as I took in all of the information. If it was against the Hidden Leaf, then I knew this was going to be a tough battle, probably one we wouldn't win. "Alright, I understand." "Good, because we leave now," the man said before he suddenly turned and started running. I did the same and followed him. We exited through the village gates and began to traverse through the trees, jumping from one to the other. We had been made to practice this during our time in the academy as part of our chakra control lessons. It was vital that we could move around quickly and use the terrain to our advantage. The man didn't say another word for the whole trip, and so I too decided to be silent. We didn't stop to rest, but luckily for me I had decent chakra levels, and was able to keep up the physical exertion for long enough until we arrived at our destination. There was a large camp set up with lots more shinobi waiting to disembark on the 3 ships in the harbor. The camp was set in an alcove of 2 large cliffs, and it provided a good tactical standpoint for traveling out to sea. The others noticed our arrival and came over to greet us. Well, look who's back. And I see you've brought fresh meat, Nobu. One of the men said, looking at me with a smile. The man with me who had just been called Nobu gestured to me. This here is Fiona Yuki, fresh out of the academy and only one of his class to be given to us this year. The others who heard the name glared a little before one of them broke the silence. You must have really pissed someone off to be sent to us, kid. You know genin don't last long on the front lines, he said with a laugh from the others. Nobu turned to me as they left talking amongst themselves. Make yourself at home, kid. And get some rest, we leave in a few hours. With that, he walked away and left me by myself. I decided to get some food from the small food tent. It was a help yourself stand with a large pot of stew that had been left with bowls next to it. I got myself a bowl and sat down to eat on a rock. Most of the others were in groups chatting away. Some were checking their weapons and others fast asleep on the ground. It was completely different than the academy had been. My meal was interrupted by a sudden outburst of raised voices coming from not too far from where I was sat. I decided to take a peek and could see a group forming around whatever was happening. Squeezing through a small gap, I managed to get a better look at what was going on. There were 3 men dressed in robes, each with a crazy look in their eye. They were facing off against 6 other men, all wearing the standard hidden mist attire, and it looked like a fight was about to break out. Fucking Kagaya. Watch where you're going, scum. One of the men shouted. The word Kagaya piquing my attention. I looked at the 3 men in robes closer, and was shocked to see they were all from the Kagaya clan. Their black hair was tied back, and the zigzag cranial pattern in the center of their head was visible. They also had the red markings on their foreheads and eyes. It was so obvious they were Kagaya, I don't know how I had missed it. Say that again and I'll kill all of you. One of the Kagaya said with a large devilish smile on his face. You could feel the bloodlust in the air as the pressure around both groups got heavier. The group of Mist Ninja slowly reached for their weapons, causing the Kagaya to smile devilishly. Suddenly Nobu stood in the middle of them, quickly getting all of their attention. What the hell is going on here? He shouted, looking at the 6 men, who all stood to attention. And nothing, sir. Of them said quickly. Nobu turned to face the 3 Kagaya. Care to let me in on what's happening here? He asked. The Kagaya simply smiled and turned his back. Nothing, just having a friendly chat, reminding your men of their place. He said as the 3 of them walked away, murder still strong in their eyes. Nobu turned back to the others and slapped one of them on the head. Are you fucking crazy? What the hell are you doing picking a fight with the Kagaya? Not a second longer and you all would have been killed. The others tried to defend their action, but Nobu wasn't having it as he told them to get lost and stay out of the way. All 3 of the Kagaya had a large build and a killer feel about them. The one in the middle, who I guess was the leader of the small group, turned, catching my eyes with his own as they walked away, his half-cut eyebrows lowering as he noticed the red markings on my forehead. I decided this was a good time to slip through the small crowd and disappear from his view. The attention of those crazy bastards was the last thing I needed right now. Pretty soon we had boarded the ships and set sail across the misty sea. The ships were nothing impressive and were more built for stealth than anything else. Each ship carried about 80 shinobi. There was quite the lack of space, and we were all forced to squash in together. Luckily for me, I had boarded a different boat to the one the Kagaya had gotten on. After all, being in a tight space with them was not a good idea. On the journey we were all filled in on the mission at hand. It turned out that the hidden mist had turned the land of hot water into a small base. The land of hot water was located on the west side of the land of fire's borders, and made it a perfect place to serve as a footing. Our mission was simple: provide reinforcements to the front lines who were currently battling with the Hidden Leaf forces along the border. Apparently, the Hidden Leaf's forces had been spread thin as they were also being attacked by the Hidden Stone Village, who were using the Land of Grass as a base of operations and attacking from there. We were also warned of the Hidden Cloud as they had recently engaged us in battle, but they had retreated and fallen back to the Land of Frost that was on their border. Rumor spread that the third Mizukichi himself was leading the battle against Konoha, but none of the others could confirm it was true. The trip across the sea lasted a full day, and I had even been sick a couple of times from the seasickness that came with the inexperience of sailing. We seemed to arrive safely on the shore and met no threats. Nobu took to the front as it turned out he was the commanding officer of this unit. Alright, let's move out, he shouted. Everyone roared and started running, following after him. I too joined the herd of shinobi and started running. I was by far the youngest person there. Some of the others looked 16 and above, but none were near my age. There was a good mix of both men and women too, not that it mattered. We were taught not to underestimate our opponents based on their age or gender. A large group split into 3 just like we had with boarding the boats, and quickly started jumping through the large trees. The scenery was pretty much all forest as far as the eye could see, but I had guessed we would soon arrive at something less pleasant to the eye. Not long had passed and we arrived at our destination. The forest had ended as we came to a large piece of flat land that had been turned into a base. There were tents and defensive trenches built around the makeshift camp. It was filled with hidden mist shinobi, some of which looked worse for wear. This was the first time I had seen a true battlefield with my own eyes. It was like a scene from an old World War I tape. Trenches had been dug as a defensive setting, weapons were scattered across the flat top that I guessed was no man's land farther out. The ground was scorched, and the earth had been blackened by fire and explosions. The dead bodies of Mist and Leaf shinobi still scattered across the battlefield, leaving a fresh reminder of what awaited many of us who had arrived. Nobu met with the other commanding officers who briefed him of the situation. Meanwhile, the troops around me spread out into small groups and began to chat amongst themselves. The units of soldiers that were already here looked tired and fresh from battle, with most being covered in dirt or blood. Suddenly I felt a heavy pressure come from behind me, and although every fiber in my body told me not to, I slowly turned around. It was the Kaguya men from before, all three of them staring at me with their wild eyes. I quickly tried to walk away, but my path was blocked by the three of them as they quickly stopped me. The leader spoke first, giving me a strange look. "No need to be rude, little one. We only want to ask you some questions," he said with a large smile on his battle-hardened face. I turned to look at him and nodded. "What do you want from me?" He crossed his arms and tilted his head to the side. "I couldn't help notice the markings on your forehead. Only members of the Kaguya have such markings, and I've never seen you before. Who are you?" I could tell I wasn't leaving until they were satisfied with my answer, so I decided I had no choice. "My name is Fiona Yuki," I said without fear or hesitation in my voice, looking into his eyes. The large brute looked at me intriguingly. He uncrossed his arms and was about to speak when suddenly a voice shouted, "Ambush!" The sounds of explosions got everyone's attention as bodies went flying through the air. Swarms of hidden leaf shinobi suddenly appeared out of the forest as they were trying to end the surprise attack fast. In a way, it felt like I had just been saved from whatever the Kaguya was about to do. Our commanders gave the order for us to counterattack, and the waves of hidden mist and hidden leaf shinobi clashed in an all-out battle to the death. It was a mess of blood and blades, fire and water, men and women, even children littered the battlefield as the battle raged on. It was hard to tell who was friend or foe in the chaos of battle. The commanders had ordered as many shinobi who were able to use the hidden mist jutsu, while the hidden leaf's forces countered with a combined fire style. I was unlucky and had been caught in the middle of battle. My senses were at their maximum, and my body seemed to move on its own. Taking advantage of my KekkaiGenkai abilities, I had already sprouted bone spikes around my body and killed anyone who dared attack me. I flipped and danced through the air, blocking and attacking in a whirlwind of unstoppable wrath. My bones were harder than steel, and easily cut through any protection that the hidden leaf shinobi were wearing. I had pressed so far forward, slashing and chopping men down, that soon I realized I was all alone, deep in the enemy ranks. I could have sworn there were at least 10 others with me not a moment ago, but now my odds were not looking good, as I was surrounded on all sides by leaf shinobi. "What the hell is this kid?" one of them shouted, looking at my bones in horror. "Let's kill him quickly. He's already taken out too many of us," another one said. I decided it was time to make my escape, and my window of opportunity was closing fast. Quickly I formed the hand signs and a dome of ice covered me, blocking a handful of kunai as it did. "It's ice," one of them shouted. "Let's use a combined fire style," said another. I knew my ice was fire resistant, but against a combined fire style I doubted it would hold so well. Luckily for me, I had already planned for this while training in the ninjutsu classes back at the academy. Making the hand signs as fast as I could, an ice mirror formed in front of me. Quickly I stepped into the crystal mirror of ice just as the leaf shinobi unleashed their fire style. I had figured this jutsu out by remembering Haku using it in the anime, and had decided to practice it. Another mirror had formed well above the battlefield in the sky, and that's where I slipped out. It worked kind of like a zipline, allowing me to travel at a much greater speed to another mirror. From this height, I could see the entire battlefield and which side my allies were on. As I started free-falling, I created another ice mirror falling right into it, with another ice mirror appeared near the back of the trench, that I slipped out of it a little too fast, and rolled along the ground, recovering onto my hands and knees. Nobu was barking orders from the rear, keeping the others in formation and holding the line. He must have noticed my presence and he turned and looked behind him. Well, you're still alive," he said, almost seeming impressed. "If you have time to sit and rest, then you had better get your arse back in the fight," he suddenly screamed. I nodded and got up to my feet, heading back into the battle. The hidden leaf had used a combined earth style to create a large wall that they were attacking from and using as a defensive advantage. The hidden mist jutsu had all but faded now, as a large number of fire styles had changed the temperature of the air. Most of the mist ninja were taking cover in the trench, while a small handful was on the front lines engaged in battle. To no surprise of mine, the three Kaguya were at the front, striking down all who stood before them. It didn't look as if any one of them possessed the KekkaiGenkai of their clan, but they were still fierce warriors without it. One of the men who had mocked me when I first arrived at the camp with Nobu was taking cover in the trench when he spotted me. "Hey kid, you have a KekkaiGenkai, don't you? Get your arse out there and be useful." The others around him started chipping in, and I was pretty much pushed onto the battlefield. The hidden mist village really was a fucked up place. I turned back, looking at him with disgust. "Go on kid, we will cover you," he said, raising a kunai. Suddenly the trench started moving, as an enemy earth style caused the earth to crush all those trapped inside the trench. The screams of the men and women could be heard as their bodies were crushed, haunting Fina's mind. Of course, the man that had pushed him out had survived, and he quickly ran away toward the back to take cover like a coward. There was only one thing left for it. I had to charge dead ahead and try not to die. I have already done it once and I swore I wouldn't do it again. This world had granted me power, and I was going to use it all to come out of this war alive. I had been forced to the front lines by the others who were too cowardly to do it themselves. Only a small number of hidden mists were battling at the front, while the rest provided support from cover. Kunai and other weapons were flying through the air. Ninjutsu was being used all over the place, as fire and water clashed with an intense heat. A hidden leaf was using the cover of their F-style walls to fire projectiles from. Their attacks seemed more coordinated than ours did, their warriors battling together, and not just for themselves. I didn't have time to stop moving as we were outnumbered at least 5 to 1. My lungs were burning and my eyes stung from the blood dripping over them. I had lost count of how many of them I had killed, but no matter how many fell, more kept coming. Our odds were looking even worse now as it seemed Konoha reinforcements had arrived from the force. I was speeding through the hidden leaf ranks, slashing out with every part of my body. My bones covered me, and provided a huge advantage for offensive and defensive abilities. The piles of dead shinobi started to amass around me as they charged at one after the other. It mattered not how many as they all fell victim to my power, none of them being able to touch me. Expansion jutsu. I heard come from behind me. Turning to look, I was suddenly slapped by a giant hand that sent me flying through the air. I managed to flip backwards and slid along the ground, recovering. However, I lost sight of whoever had used the jutsu on me, and more hidden leaf shinobi attacked from all sides. Fire style, fireball jutsu. 2 of them shouted using the same jutsu together. I was able to counter as I created an ice mirror to block the flames. Quickly I slipped into it, and to their surprise appeared behind them in another mirror I had created. I slashed both of their throats before they had a chance to counter. Moving so fast I landed on my toes in a tight squat position. Charge man. A voice shouted from behind me. Waves of hidden mist pushing past me as I slowly stood up and wiped the blood from my face. I watched as the 3 Kagaya charged past me, but not before they gave me an alarming look, seeing my bones slowly returned into my body. Somehow we were holding the line, despite the advanced numbers of the leaf shinobi. We could really win this if we keep this up, I thought as I watched the battle unfold. However, waves of hidden mist shinobi were suddenly smashed into the air by a massive black staff that seemed to stretch across the battlefield, smashing anyone and everyone unlucky enough to find themselves in its path. A whistle suddenly sounded in the background. Retreat. The voice from the back shouted. It was Nobu. He blew the whistle again and again, shouting for everyone to fall back. I watched as my fellow hidden mist, who not 5 seconds ago had charged into battle, ready to die. Now they were running with their tails between their legs. The staff shrunk back down, and I could see a man standing at the front of the hidden leaf forces. He instantly weighed up the Aitor battlefield, taking command of the situation with ease. He wore a black jumpsuit with mesh segments over the lower portions of his limbs. The most noticeable thing had to be the armored hood with a bandana-like forehead protector that was tied with 2 long straps. It was him. He was the 3rd Hokage, the god of shinobi. My anxiety was confirmed as the shinobi around me started screaming as they ran for their lives. It's the Hokage. Run for your lives. One of them shouted. He will kill us all. Another voice said as they ran as fast as they could back into the forest. The rest was a blur as all I could see was moving bodies that rushed to take cover, running for their lives. Massive shuriken suddenly cut through the lines of ninja that were still trying to get away. It was the Hokage's jutsu. He had thrown one and then it suddenly turned into 20, flying in all directions. They were too big to stop and shredded anything they hit before ripping into the earth, covered in the blood of their victims. I retreated into the forest with the other survivors, having been lucky to avoid the massive death shuriken. Even Nobu had been struck down by one of the massive shurikens the Hokage had unleashed, and now all that was left was to head back to the ships and retreat back to the land of water. But that plan was quickly cut short as a mass of hidden leaf ninja appeared in the forest blocking our path. Attack. Their leader shouted, starting the hellfire of battle again, letting the leaf troops slaughter the mist. The hidden mist ninja had been so focused on getting away that they had failed to notice the enemy attack until the last moment. Some tried to fight back, but there were too many enemies, and they didn't stand a chance alone. A few were able to slip past the onslaught, myself included. I had managed to kill 3 of them before slipping past the left flank and away into the forest, unseen. I didn't look back as I heard the screams. I didn't slow my pace and I didn't care. All that mattered was that I made it off that hell alive. After a short time, I had made it back to the shoreline, but to my terror, the hidden leaf had already sabotaged the ships, taking control of the coast. Having no choice, I slowly slipped back into the tree line and darted off. I had to find a safe place to hide, knowing that they would probably send out small teams to hunt for any survivors, and I didn't fancy being taken prisoner. The screams and sound of battle had slowed before finally stopping, and I assumed it was over. I stopped, squatting down on a thick branch I had landed on to rest. Looking down I could see 3 hidden mist ninja hidden behind a tree. I guess they had seen the same as me, and were trying to come up with a plan to escape. I jumped down and walked over to them, slowly giving them a surprise by accident. God, it's you. We could have killed you then, brat. Be a little smarter next time, will you? The man said as he lowered his kunai. It was the man who had pushed me out of the trench, saying he would cover me. Of course he would survive. I thought to myself. He was with another man who was injured and a woman. She was tending to the gash on his leg, but it wasn't looking good. How the hell did you survive, kid? The man asked me as he sat down leaning back against a large tree. I shrugged. Have you seen the ships? I asked. He nodded with a grim expression on his face. I had nothing left to do than find our own way back now. I looked over to the other two as the injured man let out a small groan. Will he make it? I asked, looking back to the other one. Hell if I know, kid. Stop asking me so many goddamn questions. I looked away and was about to sit down when the bushes moved to the right of us, catching everyone by surprise. I was about to attack, but I stopped when I saw who it was. It was the man from the Kekkaiga clan who had tried to ask me questions that time. He was alone, and I guess the other two were Kia. His face was still the same as before, but had blood on it, making him seem even more threatening. The others relaxed a little, but not much as they realized it wasn't an enemy. I swear if anyone else pops out of a bush I'll. He was cut off as the Kekkaiga man spoke. So you survived. I am not surprised. You have a gift, he said, his voice deep. I watched him carefully. Thanks. I said, not sure what else to say, as he walked over to the injured man, who let out another groan. The woman was trying to use what I assumed was medical ninjutsu on him, but it didn't seem to be helping. The Kekkaiga looked at him and suddenly sliced the man's throat, causing the woman to scream in shock. What the fuck? She shouted as she raised a kunai to him. The Kekkaiga man's face didn't change as he gave her a severe glance. He was going to die anyway. He said as he walked back over to me, not being bothered in the slightest. My guard was up now. Was he going to try and attack me? Or just chat? I had no idea. Yuki, was it? He asked as he stood looking over me with his massive frame shadowing my own. Who are you? I asked, looking up to meet his gaze. He smiled before answering. My name is Tachi Kekkaiga. As I looked closer at the man, I realized he didn't have a mark on him. He moved his large hand so I could see it, allowing a bone to protrude from his skin. He held it there for a moment before allowing it to slide back into his skin, not saying a word. I couldn't help but give a surprised look, and he smiled again. I was the only member of the Kekkaiga with the Shikatsumiyaku ability, until I heard rumors of a young boy in the academy who possessed the same ability. Not only do you possess our clan's most powerful KekkaiGenkai, but you also possess the ice release of the Yuki clan. It is unheard of. Tell me, boy, what was your mother's name? He said, looking at Final with wide eyes. His face was a little twisted as he spoke, and I could tell he had a screw or two loose. Her name is Kachina Yuki, I said, not even blinking as looked into his eyes. Tachi turned around and started laughing. His laugh grew louder before he stopped, placing a hand over his face as he looked off into the distance. 10-finger drilling bullets. He shouted as he threw both arms out, crossing them over one another. 10 bullet-shaped bones shot out of each of his fingertips, and ripped a 3-man squad of Hidden Leaf Shinobi to shreds with ease. Tachi must have easily been over 30 years old, giving him a long time to master his abilities. I bet he knew how to do things I had not even been able to think of. The other Hidden Mist ninja quickly jumped up at the sudden attack, standing in a guard position. Should they found us? The man said as he scouted the surrounding area. Hidden Mist Jutsu. The woman shouted as she made the hand signs, allowing mist to sudden whip up all around us, and dart up into the trees. I looked at Tachi and he looked back at me. After you, kid. He said, waving a hand. I didn't hesitate. After all, taking my chances with him was probably better than with a small army of Hidden Leaf. We jumped through the trees for a good hour at least, trying to cover as much distance as we could. If there were still teams of Konoha Shinobi looking for us, then it was probably best not stopping at all. However, I was starting to feel the effects of the previous battle. Having used a lot of chakra had caused my small body to become exhausted. I was starting to lag behind and the others could tell. Come on, kid, keep the pace up. The man shouted as he stopped on a thick branch, looking at me. I stopped on a branch, trying to catch my breath. I felt as if I was about to pass out and took a knee, trying to catch my breath. We need to stop and rest. The woman said, taking pity on me. He's just a kid. She also added. Tachi stayed silent, but the look he gave the man said it all. Fine, we will make camp down there for now, but only until he is ready to move out again. I looked down and could see a small clearing with a stream running through it. Jumping down, I plunged my head into the water, drinking enough water to fill a bathtub. I sat on my knees and washed the blood off of my face, looking at my reflection, as I did. It was a sad fact that killing was such a small thing in this world. I had never killed anyone before I was reborn here, and now I had killed too many to even bother counting. The others were also resting up now, apart from Tachi, who just sat with his legs crossed on a large stone, never taking his eyes off of me. It made me wonder if he was the only member of his clan with the KekkaiGenkai. Did that mean it was a dormant gene only awakening to an extremely small few, or did it have to be passed on by those who had the KekkaiGenkai already? Could he be I thought as I looked at him. Questions for later. I thought as I lay on my back looking up at the sky. The sun was starting to set now, and the final streams of sunlight broke through the tree leaves. It had been one hell of a day, and I couldn't seem to fight the exhaustion any longer, letting my body give way to sleep. Wake up, goddammit, the voice said as its owner shook my body. I had been in such a deep sleep that I had failed to notice the ambush of Hidden Leaf Shinobi attacking from all sides. There was at least 15 of them, and looking over to the left, I could see Tachi fighting with 5 of them, and a woman in our group was on the ground screaming as her arm had been cut off. "We have to get." His words were cut off as two kunai hit him in the head, causing blood to splash on my face, as his body hit the ground hard. That was it, I was up and I was alert. Rolling backwards onto my feet, I created a dome of ice around me for protection. From inside I could see the enemy ninja moving, and some even attacked my defense. "This isn't good," I said as I quickly formed a few hand signs, causing the ice around me to shatter, skewering anyone who was too close to it. Even with my abilities, I couldn't see through the back of my head, and two kunai hit me in the back. They didn't do any damage as I had already put up my defenses, allowing a small layer of bone to grow under my skin, acting as body armor. There was 6 of them around me in a circle, all, except for one, was wearing the standard Konoha flak jacket. The last one had the Anbu grade jacket on, and his face was covered by a mask. I had to watch out for him. I thought. Watch out. This kid is a monster. One of the leaf shinobi said. I watched him kill dozens of our men in the battle. He's no ordinary ninja. He also added. Meanwhile, Tachi was battling it out with 5 other Anbu members. His skills were incredible as his abilities made him next to untouchable. They had already clocked on to his abilities, and decided to get some distance and attack with ninjutsu. Tachi also took to long-range tactics, and fired round after round of bone bullets at the Anbu. Not sure what they were, one of them tried to block the attack with his sword, but to his horror, the bone bullet snapped clean through the steel and ripped 5 holes through Ho's body. The others watched what happened and quickly realized they couldn't block the attack, dodging them instead. "Sir, there are only 2 left, this one and the kid who is surrounded," one of them said. The others didn't even look at him as he spoke through his mask. "They both die, Lord Danzo's orders," he then said after a moment. "Now." One of the Anbu shouted and he started making hand signs. 2 of the other Anbu quickly dashed behind Tachi and started making their own hand signs. The 2 from the front unleashed a massive fire-style jutsu, and the 2 from back let loose a wind style. They were combining wind and fire to create an even more powerful effect. When that Tachi was caught in, and from where I was standing, it looked like it was all over. I, on the other hand, had my own problems. If these guys saw any more of my jutsu, they would come up with a way to counter it. Luckily, nobody had made a move yet, and the tension was starting to grow. If I wanted to make it out of this alive, I had to come up with something and fast. Then it hit me. I wasn't sure if it would work, but I was running out of options. "Hidden jutsu, ice clones," I said in my head, making the hand signs. 2 clones of me formed from ice and took a fighting stance, jumping into combat as I quickly made an ice mirror and slipped into it. "Don't let him escape into that jutsu," the Anbu member of the 6 of them shouted. My clones were easily struck down by the leaf units, but that had been all part of my plan. As soon as they made contact with the enemy, I made a hand sign with one hand and boom. Both clones exploded, shattering and shooting ice spikes all over. 2 of the 6 were dealt fatal blows as the ice hit them, but the others had managed to recover. The distraction, however, had allowed me to form the other crystal ice smears all around the other members, baffling them as they took a back-to-back formation, holding their weapons up ready. "What the hell is this kid?" one of them shouted. "He's one of those ice demons," one of the others said, the fear in his voice showing. I interrupted them as I spoke. "Hidden jutsu, crystal ice spheres. This is the end for you." I had practiced this jutsu and was amazed at how strong it truly was. When Haki had used this in the anime manga, I quickly realized how much he was holding back against Naruto and Sasuke. "Which one is the real one?" one of the ninjas said, panicking as he looked at all the mirrors which had my full reflection in them. "I killed him first." With blinding speed, I shot out of the mirror I was in and darted across to another. As I was midway through the air, I launched the bone bullets from my fingertips, and his body became riddled with holes. The others froze in fear at the sight of their comrade's body, one of them quickly turning around and making a run for it. "No, wait," the Anbu member shouted, but it was too late. I dashed faster than the eye could see and shoved one of my bone blades down through his shoulder and into his heart, letting his body drop to the floor before I slipped back into the mirror. Now there was only 2 of them left, and I could tell they didn't like their chances. The massive fire and wind styles had combined, mixing together and burning everything around it to a crisp. "Did we get in?" one of the Anbu asked. Nobody said anything for a moment, not until they saw Tachi's body. Somehow he had survived the attack. His body looked demonic as all of his flesh and clothes had been burned away. His entire body was an outer layer of bone, like an exoskeleton. The sight of it was truly haunting to the hidden leaf shinobi. "What in the hell is he? That jutsu should have melted even his bones," one of them shouted in disbelief. Tachi, despite looking like an immortal monster, had still been wounded. He had covered his entire body in solid bone, even his mouth and eyes, to make sure they hadn't been melted by the intense heat. All of his skin had been stripped off, and the pain he felt must have been excruciating. Despite that, he gave out a howling battle cry, as the bone that covered his eyes and mouth disappeared before he charged at the leaf Anbu. He managed to take one of them off guard and sliced right through his sword, cutting deep into his chest, dealing a fatal blow. The other one next to him slashed at the back of Tachi's neck with his sword, but Ho's bone armor was thick, snapped the blade as it made contact with the solid bone. Tachi quickly countered with spike bones that fired out of his body from all over, one of them hitting the Anbu in the shoulder. Water style, Raging Waves Jutsu. One of the Anbu shouted as he fired a massive jet of water at Tachi. The force of the water was enough to push him back, keeping him routed against the tree trunk he had stricken against. The other quickly made some hand signs and extended his hand with his fingers open. Lightning style. He shouted as a blade of electricity shot out, hitting the water. Tachi was unable to move and was hit by the combined water and lightning styles, zapping him and leaving him badly hurt. His bones may have been harder than steel, but they were not resistant to electricity. Tachi dropped to his knees, breathing heavily now. The battle had taken its toll on him and he was seriously wounded. The two Anbu jumped over, one helping his injured comrade up, and the other drawing his sword on Tachi. "Any last words, monster?" he said as he infused his blade with lightning-style chakra to increase its cutting power. Meanwhile, the two Lee shinobi were back to back as they faced the crystallized smears. Both had their weapons drawn, and both were trying to find a way out. I was trying to keep them in the middle, while also keeping an eye on what was going on around me. Tachi was down, and I could tell he wasn't far from being killed. There was nothing I could do. I had to kill these two and make a break for it. That was my only chance of survival. Quickly I zoomed from mirror to mirror, firing out bone bullets from my fingertips as I did. They did well to dodge at first, but soon the normal Leaf Shinobi, who I had guessed from his skill was a Jonin, started to lose speed. I hit him with one of my bone bullets, and the continuous fire soon finished him off with ease. I appeared behind the Anbu member and clashed blades with him, knowing he wouldn't fall victim to my bone bullets as easily as the others. My bone blade was easily stronger than his steel one, but despite that, it was able to hold against it. He was stronger than me physical, and his skill was clearly greater than mine too. He pushed me back on the defensive and our blades locked in a battle of strength. I had to use all of my focus and chakra control to match what I was assuming was just his normal strength. The Anbu pulled his blade back and swooped it down at me with serious force that I was only just able to stop and deflect. This time I quickly pulled back, using a round of bone bullets as a distraction to make hand signs with one hand. I couldn't see his face behind his mask as he dodged the bone bullets, but I could tell he was surprised. The moisture in the air quickly froze, turning into ice spikes that shot up all around him. The Anbu quickly used a chakra jump and avoided the attack, flipping in the air as he did. He threw 4 shuriken. I was able to deflect them with my bone blade, and quickly make a run back for one of my ice mirrors, knowing that was my only chance to TK win. Unfortunately, that was the downfall of this technique. Once you left the safety of the ice mirrors, the only way back to it was to physically slip back into one by touching it again. He must have realized because he swiftly blocked my escape and knocked me back with a big sidekick. Even with my ribs shooting out to block the strike, it still hurt. The power difference between us was too great, and now my chances of winning were looking slim, and he knew it. "I hope you are ready to die for what you have done, kid," he shouted, pointing his sword at me. He defiantly had the upper hand. That was until I noticed him standing in a small puddle of water on the ground. I don't know how it had got there, but boy was I happy it had. This was my chance. If I could pull this off, I would win. I knew he was too fast and could dodge my bone bullet technique, so I pulled an explosive tag and wrapped it around a kunai without him seeing. Firing 5 bone bullets at him, just as I predicted, he lunged forwards as he dodged them, trying to close the distance between us. "Now," I shouted as I threw the explosive kunai at the ground. He noticed it and quickly jumped backwards to avoid the explosive. "Just a little more," I shouted as I ran through the dust that the explosive had created, flipping into the air and smashing a tornado kick into his arms, causing him to take another step back. "Now, ice pillar," I shouted as I flipped back, slapped both hands on the ground. The water around his feet suddenly froze and shot up, erecting a pillar of ice that froze his entire body, killing him. I fell to the ground trying to catch my breath. I had used almost all of my chakra. Now I didn't know if I would be able to escape. The Kekkaiga clan lives on. Tachi shouted at the top of his lungs, causing me to turn around and watched, as the Leaf Anbu cut his head off with the lightning-enhanced sword, cutting through his neck. It was a clean cut, and with the added cutting power from the lightning style, it was able to get through his bone exoskeleton. Tachi's head dropped to the ground and his body slowly followed. This was really looking bad now. Not only was I the only one left, but they have found a way to bypass my KekkaiGenkai with a lightning style. I noticed that the 3 of them looked surprised as they approached slowly, noticing their comrade had been frozen in ice, and the others who were dead. "He managed to kill the others by himself. He's just a kid," one of them said. "Be on your guard. He may be a kid, but he is powerful," the what I guess leader of the group said. I also took a stand and weighed my options. If I made a break for it, they would just cut me down with ease. I could try and slip into one of my ice mirrors, but I doubt I would make that either. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if they. My thoughts were cut off as the crystallized mirrors started to shatter and fall. My chakra was running dangerously low now and I couldn't even maintain the jutsu. "I guess that option is out of the window," I said under my breath. "Give it up, kid, there is nowhere to go," the Anbu said. I was like a cornered rat, but like most cornered rats, I would go out fighting and screaming if I had to. I drew a large bone that protruded out of the top of my shoulder, and then did the same from the other side. holding a blade in each hand as I took a low primal position. Bones started to sprout from my entire body as I was preparing myself to at least take one of them with me. If I was going to die again, I wouldn't go out quietly again. Watch out, he has the same jutsu the other one did. Proceed with caution, the leader said. They must be from the same clan, the other said, as he allowed his lightning style to flow through his blade. This was it. If even one leaf fell from the trees, one of us would charge, and we all knew it. Watch out, the Anbu leader shouted as a storm of shuriken and kunai suddenly littered our small battlefield. The Anbu was able to deflect the onslaught, but retreated to get a better view of the situation. 3 hidden mist shinobi landed in front of me. Looks like it's your lucky day, kid, one of them said, not turning to face me. I didn't recognize any of them, but that didn't matter. I was just glad they had shown up when they did. Damn, reinforcements. Retreat, the Anbu leader said as he threw a smoke bomb down at the ground. The other Anbu quickly grabbed the injured one, and they all escaped through the tree line, leaving the battle as a failure. The mist shinobi didn't give chase, and instead turned to face me. The man in the middle took a look around at the aftermath of our skirmish and whistled. Damn kid, did you do all this? He asked, seeming quite impressed. I no longer had the energy to speak, and now that the threat had diminished, my body felt like lead. I felt a one knee as I tried to catch myself before falling face first onto the ground. The mist ninja looked at each other and nodded. Come on kid, let's get you back to the checkpoint. I was pretty much carried back by the 3 mist ninja that came to my rescue. They said we were retreating to a small base camp located on the edge of the land of hot water and land of frost. Luckily for me, they had been patrolling the area when they happened upon our squad and saved my life from the hidden leaf Anbu. Once we arrived at the base camp, I had to give a full report of the battle to the commanding officer. After that, I was allowed to rest and given food, water and some new clothing, since mine were full of holes. Word was spreading like wildfire of a huge battle between the hidden stone and hidden mist against the hidden cloud. Rumor was that the third Reikage was dead, after battling for 3 days and 3 nights against a large combined force. The news that our Mizukage had also fallen in the battle reaching the ears of the men. Apparently the Reikage took out 10,000 troops over 3 days before he died, one of the mist ninjas said. Others chipped in and chatted amongst themselves. Panic over the Mizukage's death was starting to spread, and our commanding officers were trying to keep the rumors to a minimum, not being sure of what had really happened themselves. 2 days had passed and I had fully recovered from my previous battle. Word had spread that I was the lone survivor in the battle against the hidden leaf, even surviving against the third Hokage. I was summoned to my commanding officer's tent and told that I was being assigned to a new unit and given new orders. I entered the tent, walking over to where the commanders were gathered around a large table with a map laid out over it. They were discussing strategy and decoding enemy information to send back to HQ. I bowed and greeted the Jounin, waiting for his permission to move. He acknowledged me and told me to raise my head. Fiona Yuki, correct? He stated more than asked. I nodded, not saying a word. Word from HQ has arrived telling me what to do with you, kid. Seems you are being promoted to the rank of Shunin. Congratulations on that. Not many Genin make it through their first battle, he said as he looked over the report. You're being assigned to a new unit to gather intel on the hidden leaf. You will be working as part of a 10-man cell. Your meeting coordinates are within this scroll. You are to be there for midday. Dismiss. It was a lot of information to take in at once. I had been given a new mission, been promoted, and been told I was heading back into enemy territory all at once. The training at the academy had taught us not to ask questions, only to obey. Not really having a choice, I bowed and took my leave, restocking my equipment and headed to the coordinates located on the scroll. Seems I was heading back into the land of hot water and meeting my new team just before the border to the land of fire. As I jumped through the trees making my way to the meeting point, I realized it was the first time I had any time alone to think. Just what would my presence in this world chance, if anything at all? What did my future hold? Would I meet Naruto and some of the other main characters? I had so many questions about everything, that before I knew it I had arrived at my destination. It seemed that I was the last to arrive and the others were waiting on me. They noticed my presence and stared me down as I approached. As I got closer, who I guess was the leader stepped forward and greeted me. So you're the last front there sending me, eh? Whatever, fallen kid, he said with a gruff voice. You're not much older than him, he's your responsibility, he said looking at him. I turned to look at him. He looked no older than 16, he had short spiky blue hair and grey eyes. He didn't say anything, so I turned my attention back to our squad leader. Alright, you saw a lot, listen up. I'm Sami Hachi, your squad leader for this mission. The man spoke. He had a large frame and rough features, he was bald and had a strong black beard. Like the others, his headband was around his head, and he wore the standard mist battle attire. I was by far the youngest in the squad, next being Ao, whose name I had heard before, but couldn't place. There were 3 women, and the rest were a mix of boys and men. Our mission is to gather intel on the supply line supporting the Hidden Leaf. Intel shows that they are supplying their forces with food and equipment through these supply lines. We are to locate them and destroy them. This should prevent their frontline forces from obtaining necessary supplies, giving us and our allies the advantage. It was a straightforward mission, simple sabotage, I thought. Intel also shows that these supply lines are guarded by an escort, the abilities of which are unknown. So be ready for anything. We move out in 10 minutes, prep your equipment for battle, dismissed. The others went about their own business, as no one seemed to really know each other. The squad captain seemed to know Ao, and one or two of the others had started a conversation. I decided to do a check over my equipment and mind my own business. Ao came over and leant against the tree next to me with his arms crossed over his chest while I did. "So I hear you're a member of the Yuki clan?" he asked. I nodded without looking at him as I placed my kunai back into my weapon holder. "How old are you, kid?" he asked. I turned to look at him and had to think about his question for a few seconds. If I remembered correctly, I had turned 9 a day ago, so that made me 9. "I'm 9 years old," I said. Ao chuckled to himself. "Well, kid, let's hope you make it to 10. He said before he walked off to tend to his own equipment. From everything I had experienced so far, the Hidden Mist Ninja was nothing like the Hidden Leaf Ninja in the anime manga. They were cold and ruthless killing machines. The Hidden Leaf seemed warm and welcoming, but the Mist was nothing like that. It was a cold village with only one purpose, to raise and train killers that would obey commands no matter what. I was quickly snapped out of my thoughts by Sama as he spoke to everyone. "Alright you lot, let's move out," he shouted as he jumped up into the trees, leading us on our mission. We all quickly followed suit and followed in an arrow formation, with one of our center back like a funny looking diamond. It was a basic formation we used when moving through enemy territory, and it was taught to us even in the academy. We had been traveling for well over half a day before we stopped to rest and set up our first checkpoint. Luckily we had managed not to run into any enemy scouts, allowing us to travel smoothly through the land of fire. We were given time to rest and eat, even though our meal was just our basic ration bars. They didn't taste of anything but gave you everything you needed to keep your energy levels up. We couldn't cook anything as a fire would give away our position. It was late now, and the moon was a sliver in the sky, not giving much light. We took turns on guard duty while the others slept, doing an hour each with me going first, as after which I drifted off looking at the stars, and for a moment forgot all about what had happened to me. Next thing I knew, it was time to get up, and I was woke by a rather hard kick to the bottom of my foot. I had been woken up like that many times back in the academy, and I could never get used to it. We were up in a military-like fashion and had soon eliminated all trace that we were ever there. We had covered a lot of distance and were now in the northwest of the land of fire. Further north was the land of waterfalls, and further northwest was the land of grass. The land of grass had become a battleground between the Hidden Stone and the Hidden Leaf, who had become the main focus of the war, as the two countries battled it slid more than all of the others. We were closing in on our objective, and according to our intel, the supply line was due to make a delivery to the troops on the front lines today. Meaning we would set up an ambush to destroy the supplies and kill any resistance met. It was basic guerrilla warfare. Once the plan had been laid out, we took our positions and it became a simple waiting game. I had been placed with Ao, while the others were also placed in units of 2, tactically split up to cover a full 360-degree diameter around the path. It was a perfect ambush tactic that allowed us to strike hard and fast from every angle to gain a total advantage over our enemy. We must have waited for about 2 hours before the supply line came into view. 3 large wagons were being pulled by horses, and the wagons were each filled with supplies. Each wagon had 2 people on them and 4 shinobi surrounding them on either side. There was also a team of Hidden Leaf Ninja that looked to be younger than the others. It was most likely a Jonin and his team of Genin or Chunin. I counted a total of 4 civilians, 8 shinobi guards, and 1 4-man team. 12 enemies in total and only 10 of us. As the caravan got closer to the ambush zone, Ao gave me a nudge and stated that one of the shinobi on the port side of the first wagon was a Hyuga. I knew that meant he passed the Byakugan, and I could tell Ao was on edge about it. After all, they were a very well-known clan in the Hidden Leaf village, being praised for their powerful KekkaiGenkai and eyesight. From what I could remember, if he decided to activate his eyes, then our ambush would be pointless. However, I also knew if I acted without orders from Sama, there would be consequences. Not a moment later the first strike came. A storm of shuriken and kunai was unleashed from the tree lines coming from every angle. "Now," Ao said as he dashed towards the Hyuga member with his blade drawn, going for the kill. The wagon drivers and a few of the less suspecting or less skilled Leaf Ninja had been killed from the initial onslaught. Now only 6 remained, and they quickly went on the defensive. "It's an ambush, counter defenses now," one of the Leaf Ninjas shouted, but it was too late. Sama made quick work of him and led the assault with the others following. Ao had become locked in battle with the Hyuga member, and he was being pushed on the defensive. Ao was starting to get desperate, and could not match his opponent's superior jutsu, overcommitting the thrusts from his blade. The Hyuga span and struck him with his fingers, causing Ao to scream out in pain, before the Hyuga struck again and again in a blinding fury. I had seen this before, knowing this was the 64 palms technique, used to completely shut down an opponent's chakra network. However, I had my own problems. Sliding underneath one of the Leaf Ninjas, I slid his Achilles, causing the man to fall to the ground, screaming before I silenced him with a killing blow. 2 of the others tried to attack me from either side, rushing in with their kunai. But I had already predicted this and unleashed a full-blown defense, impaling them before they had time to react. I ended up with a few stares from my teammates, but the battle quickly took attention away from me and back to the enemy. Two of our female teammates rushed to Ao's aid trying to attack the Hyuga from both sides. He was too fast and with his Byakugan activated, could see them coming from a mile away. He jumped backwards and suddenly spun so fast that he smashed both of the girls through the air, crashing into the ground hard. A storm of shuriken flew through the air right at him, but again his quickly spanned so fast that he deflected all of them without breaking a sweat. However, one of the shuriken that he had deflected struck Ao in his right eye, knocking him to the ground screaming in pain. Arg. The rest of us that were not engaged in battle quickly surrounded him, but no one was willing to make the first move. It was a stalemate, and I knew I had to be careful while fighting this guy. Suddenly, Sama and another guy from our team rushed him. Sama threw a jumping spinning heel kick to the Hyuga's head, who easily blocked the attack. He then ducked under the slash that was aimed at the back of his head, spinning on his heels as he smashed a massive double palm strike into the guy with the sword's chest, breaking his ribcage and sending him flying through the air. Sama engaged in an exchange of blows with the Hyuga, but was quickly outclassed and put on the defensive, with the Hyuga simply being too strong for him to handle. Ao was being tended to by the only other females, while he was still conscious. She seemed to know medical ninjutsu and was tending to his eye and entire body, trying to help as his chakra points had been shut down. Two of the others were busy setting the supplies on fire as ordered by Sama before the ambush, which left me, Sama and another guy whose name I didn't know versus the Hyuga. Air palm. The Hyuga shouted as he struck his palm into the air, creating a massive shockwave to strike me with. I was propelled into the air, smashing into a tree only being unscathed, thanks to my bone defense cushioning the blow. Sama and the other guy were fighting a losing battle, and the Hyuga quickly finished the other guy off with a quick 10-strike burst, hitting down his center line taking him out. Sama was taking the time of his teammates' downfall to start weaving hand signs. It would seem that he still had one final trick up his sleeve. The Hyuga clocked onto what he was doing and was too fast, quickly going on the offensive. Sama was pressed and lost his focus, suddenly being forced to try and dodge and block the incoming attacks. The supply wagons had been set ablaze now, and the two other members of our unit quickly jumped in to help save Sama. I too was ready for another shot at him, having gotten back to my feet, entering the battle. Rotation. The Hyuga suddenly shouted before he started spinning rapidly, letting his chakra cover his entire body like a weapon. Both of our teammates were struck down from the Hyuga's rotation attack, sending them smashing into the ground hard. Sama, having already seen the attack before, was able to dodge it at the last second, jumping back out of the way. He was breathing heavily now, but so was the Hyuga, having used a lot of his chakra to fend so many of us off. This was my chance. Jumping in, I threw a spin kick, aimed at the Hyuga's head, which he blocked. As I landed with my back to him, I allowed the bones to shoot from my back, trying to take him off guard. It was a success, with one of my bone spikes piercing his shoulder, getting him to cry out in pain. Sama jumped over my head ready to deliver the final blow, but the Hyuga bit through the pain and shot off one last air palm, landing a direct hit on Sama. I quickly shifted the bones to return into my body, dropped down low with a spinning kick to his ankle, knocking him to the ground. I didn't want to waste any time and went right for the killing blow. However, to my surprise, he struck me with a surprise jab to my shoulder, using his fingers. My arm went limp and he quickly smashed his foot into the side of my head, taking me off guard and sending me crashing like a ragdoll. If not for my reinforced bones, that kick would have broken my tiny neck. I stood to my feet slowly, still not able to move my right arm. He was also standing now and breathing heavily from his wound. The veins that surrounded his eyes faded, and it appeared he could no longer hold his Byakugan, due to his low levels of chakra. "This fight isn't over," he said, trying to raise his guard. Suddenly, Ao appeared behind him and slashed down hard with his blade. The Hyuga was too slow to react without his Byakugan, and Ao landed a killing blow to his face, slashing right down his left eye. Sweet justice, an eye for an eye. The Hyuga dropped to the ground dead with Ao standing over him as he flicked the blood off his blade. "You okay, kid?" he asked after a short pause. If anything, my injuries were the least of our worries, and I was surprised at how fast he was able to recover from his wounds. Our whole team had been taken down, apart from our medic, myself and Ao. The smoke from the burning supplies would surely draw attention soon, and we had to retreat quickly before reinforcements arrived. I walked over to Ao and looked down at the Hyuga. "He was strong," I said, acknowledging his strength. Ao agreed as he pulled off the Hyuga's headband. Well, it seems this one was from the main family," he said with a devilish smile. I looked at him confused at first until my memory clicked. He was right, there was no curse seal on this guy's forehead, meaning he was of the main family of the Hyuga clan. That means his Byakugan is ours for the taking. "What's the saying, an eye for an eye?" Ao said, smirking. He knelt down, slowly reaching his fingers towards the Hyuga's eye, plucking the remaining eyeball from the dead man's skull with care, before he turned to our medical ninja. "Hey, can you transplant this eye?" he shouted at her. The girl seemed shocked at first, but then nodded. "Why, yes I can," she replied. "Good, then come and do it," he said harshly. "Check to see who's dead. If they are, then we must destroy their body. Can you manage that, kid?" he then said, looking at me. It was standard procedure among shinobi. We did it to prevent our enemies from learning or stealing information from the remains of our fallen comrades. I got to work, quickly assessing who was alive or dead, while Lao was having his eye tended to by our medic. The Hyuga had been so precise in his strikes that he was able to hit vital organs and go for cull shots, even though he was outnumbered or exhausted. A truly amazing show of skill. They were all dead. All apart from Sama, who only clung to life by a thread. He didn't have much time left as he had unfortunately been impaled on a tree branch, ripping his insides to shreds. I ran over to see if I could help, but he just laughed at me. "Don't worry kid, it's too late for me, make sure you destroy my body and report the mission a success," he said, keeping a smile on his face regardless of the situation. I nodded and waited with him as he took his final breath before I removed his large body and dragged it over to the others. Once there I set the bodies on fire, not staying to watch. The medic had finished implanting Ao's new Byakugan. Finally, I had made the connection to who he was at this point. I remembered he was with the 5th Mizukage at the 5 Kaga Summit and played an important role in the future of this world. "Alright, then this mission is a success. It's time to report back to camp," Ao said, turning to face us. Half of his face was covered in bandages from the medic after she had finished his eye transplant. We both nodded and we followed his lead back through the land of fire, heading back to base to give our report. 1 year had gone by since my encounter with the Hyuga clan member. Our mission had been a success, but with heavy losses. The higher-ups didn't care because we had been able to retrieve the Byakugan. This was a huge achievement and one that had not gone unnoticed by the Hidden Leaf village. In the last year that had passed, I had fought in 3 more large-scale battles, and completed a total of 38 missions. 0 D rank, 15 C rank, 13 B rank and 10 A rank. I had survived everything they had thrown at me and become a member of the elite tracking unit. This unit was the equivalent to the Lee Sanbu unit, and I was currently its youngest member, being 10 years old, making quite a name for myself. Rumors of the 3rd Mizukage's death had been just that. He had survived but suffered life-changing injuries. There were current votes on who the next Mizukage would be, but nothing had been put in place. The 3rd had become very private, and nobody saw him. He was like a true shadow. We were still at war, and neither village seemed willing to give up the fight anytime soon. Intel showed that the Hidden Stone was gathering a massive invasion force to march on the Land of Fire, the hidden grass still under their control. There were rumors that we were planning on using our secret weapon, but it was a need-to-know operation, and I had yet to be told anything more. The Mists had taken huge losses in the war effort so far, and more were lost after each battle. With my new rank, I had been allowed to return to see my mother Kachina in the Yuki village. Many of its members had been lost in the war, and so few remained now. Not that I had a strong connection to them or anything, but it was very noticeable. If I remember correctly, not long after this war there would be a smaller civil war in the Land of Water that would kill off a lot of clans and KekkaiGenkai users. The next few weeks that went by were the most peaceful days I had spent in a long time. All of our forces had been told to return home and await further orders. Something seemed off, but no one was entirely sure what it was. I was currently staying in accommodation that was provided to all lead ninja in the center of the Hidden Mist. The only missions that had not been put on hold were the ones to track down rogue ninja. Of course, spies and information units were also still being sent out, but other than that the village was on lockdown. Not long after news came that the yellow flash of the leaf, who I knew as the soon-to-be 4th Hokage, had destroyed Kanabi Bridge and wiped out 1,000 Hidden Stone ninja. Turns out that Kanabi Bridge was key for the line of supply for the Hidden Stone's troops. Now that it had been destroyed and 1,000 men wiped out by a single man, there were rumors that the Hokage and Tsuchikage would sign a peace treaty. I was pretty sure that where we were in the current timeline that Kakashi had gotten his Sharingan and Obito was thought to be dead. Within the hour of hearing the news, my unit was summoned to the council room to be briefed on a top-secret mission. There was easily over 100 of us that had been called upon, and I had a bad feeling. The Mizukage himself was present behind his dark cover, sealing off any visibility of him, and his personal guard were with him as always. The room was silent as everyone wondered why we had been called. Everyone in the room was of Jounin leveler Anbu, and everyone could tell that something big was about to go down. The silence was broken when the Mizukage himself spoke. "You may be wondering why I have summoned you all here, as I am sure you have heard. The Hidden Leaf and Hidden Stone are pursuing a peace agreement. This is the perfect time to strike the leaf. We will use the full might of our arsenal and unleash the tailed beast upon them." The room stayed silent. It also helped that everyone in here was a professional, and knew not to give any reaction. We were trained as soldiers to carry out orders, not to question them. The plan was laid out. We were to kidnap a girl from the Hidden Leaf village. Our sealing team was then to seal the 3 tails into her, allowing her to escape back to the Hidden Leaf, where the beast would be unleashed and cause massive damage, striking at the very heart of the Hidden Leaf. We had little time to prepare and we were heading out this very night. It was all starting to fall into place. If I remembered correctly, Kakashi would kill this girl Rin, and then Obito would kill everyone there. This was not looking good for me at all. My strength and skill had come a long way, but I didn't know if I was ready to fight Obito with his Magicum Sharingan just yet. I had to come up with a plan to survive. I had made it through so much and survived all the odds. If not for my KekkaiGenkai, I would have died many times over. It truly was a gift I had been given in this new life. Along with my Shikatsu abilities, I also possessed the ice release that combined water and wind release to create my ice style. This had set me well above the curb, already having access to such powerful abilities it almost seemed unfair. The combination of jutsu I could now chain together was extremely powerful. Some had called me a prodigy, and others feared me for my abilities. Of course, my intelligence had been tested and was way above average. But what did I expect? After all, I did retain the knowledge of my old life and world, 25 years of knowledge and learning, along with the 10 years I had spent in this world so far. To them, I was 10 years of age, but mentally I was 35. Now that I was an Anbu member, I did not need to keep my abilities or smarts a secret, for in the Bloody Mist, the only way to gain respect was to have power. The key to my quick line of promotion through the ranks of the Blood Mist was thanks to the war. Due to the loss of so many warriors, the need for strong shinobi was increasing drastically. Along with my abilities and proven battle record, I was put to the test more than I would like to remember. Unlike the Leaf, the Blood Mist didn't think twice about using children as weapons. This had led the officials and higher-ups to recognize my abilities, and have no choice but to promote me, allowing me to go on harder missions. It was unheard of that someone of my age could possess such skill, and I think it scared a lot of people. The time for the mission had come before I knew it. I donned my Anbu uniform and placed my tracker mask over my face. I had been issued 2 swords that were on my back, not that I needed them. Our units had been split into 4 units of 25 in total, each unit having its own commander and responsibility. My unit's job was to kidnap the target and take her to the ceiling location. It all seemed too easy. Everything had been planned out. Her location was pinned down to a T along with other information. It just seemed too easy, and I was pretty sure I knew why. I was sure this was all of Madara Uchiha's doing. The problem with spending so much time here was that your memory of events stated to get a little hazy now and then. My suspicions were escalated when we snagged the target without resistance. We quickly completed our mission of getting her to the Sealing Squad, who had already made the preparations to seal the 3 tails within her. We were told to stand guard and not let anybody interfere with the sealing ritual. My unit was stationed just outside, while another was inside and the last stationed around the border. Not many hours later, the sealing had been a success, and we were briefed of the plan to let her be rescued and give chase, only pretending to chase them as to ensure the delivery of the package to the Hidden Leaf. Events turned out as expected. Kakashi showed up and rescued Rin, who gave chase through the forest as we were inside the Land of Fire. This is where it could go very wrong. I knew for a fact what was going to happen next was not good at all. All squads had arrived in a clearing on a rocky terrain overlooking the ocean. It was also raining, which made the mood even worse. I watched from behind my mask as Kakashi pierced straight through Rin with his lightning blade. In TH end, she had chosen to kill herself, knowing what we had planned to do to unleash the 3 tails upon the Hidden Leaf. Now was my chance. It had to be now, while everyone's attention was focused on Kakashi and Rin. Using one hand behind my back, I created an ice mirror that was linked to another high up in the air, its reflection hidden by the full moon's radiant glow. As I slipped into the ice mirror, leaving an ice clone as my replacement, I heard the scream. It was Obito, just as I knew he would. He had seen Kakashi kill Rin, and it sent him into a wild frenzy. My fellow Mist Ninja had no idea what they were in for. One of them threw a handful of shuriken at him, clearly underestimating him, but they simply passed through his body and struck the tree behind him. Obito charged in like a madman. The power of his steps cracked the very ground beneath him. Striking his first victim with his palm, wood suddenly burst out, turning the Anbu into a human porcupine from the inside out. Blood splattered all over, but Obito simply snapped his arm away and turned to his next prey. 3 Mist Anbu jumped into the air, swords drawn ready to impale Obito from above, but once again their attacks passed right through him, and their swords pierced their comrade instead. Obito didn't waste any time and jumped into the air, landing a perfect spin kick, snapping each of their necks the strength of his kick, causing them to hit the ground so hard that they imprinted into it. The other Mist Ninja were so shocked at what was happening that they were starting to panic. "We need to at least retrieve the girl. We can't let the enemy get a hold of her corpse," one of them shouted. He wielded strange jutsu. Another one said in fear. 2 of them made a break, heading for Rin's still body. Obito did the same, and charged through the Mist Anbu in front of him, their attacks simply passing right through him, not one of them being able to touch him. Obito launched a wood missile so hard at one of the Mist Ninjas that it took him off his feet and sent him crashing into the ground, as wooden spikes skewered his body like a piece of meat. Obito charged into the other Mist Ninja, who was too busy looking at the horror that had become his teammate. His fist smashed into his face so hard that his head hit the ground at sound-breaking levels, shattering the rock beneath. Obito then kicked him up and grabbed him by the hair, hitting him in the face so hard that his mask shattered into pieces. Obito pounded on his face, strike after strike, the sound of flesh beating flesh, until his blood soaked the ground. The other Mist Ninjas stood silent, too fearful to even flinch. Obito slowly stood up and turned to face the remaining Mist Anbu. They were scared. Obito took one step, and suddenly every one of them wanted to flee, but it was too late. Wood shot out of the side of his body so fast that an entire forest of trees swallowed and crushed every last one of them. They were helpless, like lambs to the slaughter. Their screams filled the night sky and their blood soaked the earth below. My ice clone had also been caught in the carnage. However, using my defensive abilities, even the mighty power of the wooden grip was not enough to crush my body. I had seen enough now and decided it was time to release my clone and make my escape, while Obito was focused on Rin's body. Using my crystallized mirrors jutsu, I could create them anywhere the eye could see, and then I could slip between them as if I was walking through a door. It was certainly not the first time I had used this jutsu to make my escape from overwhelming odds, and I was sure it would not be the last. My arrival back to the village was met with extreme speculation. After all, I was the lone survivor of 100 Anbu and Jounin level ninja. I was pretty much interrogated as to what happened and how I made it back. Even the Mizukichi was present, but covered in his portable transport, so you could not see him, along with all members of the council. Not only had we suffered a huge loss in manpower, but we had thought to have lost one of our tailed beasts. I gave the best information I could about what had happened without going into too much detail. At least 3 hours had passed since we had started my interrogation. I had told them that a masked man had shown up and killed everyone. Our attacks passed right through him, and no one could touch him. I stated that I was lucky to make it out with my life. I had confirmed that the girl had been killed, and that the plan had been a failure. Soon the Mizukichi himself gave permission for the debrief to end, and stated that I was free to return to my quarters. The other members objected, but the Mizukichi said there was no need to press the matter anymore, and that we should instead focus our efforts on locating the three tails upon its revival. Once I got back to my quarters, I was finally able to breathe a sigh of relief. I had a bad feeling that the Mizukichi could tell I wasn't letting on to everything I knew, but for some reason, he decided to drop the matter. It didn't make sense, but I was kind of glad for it. Seeing Obito in action made me realize just how much of a difference certain jutsu or abilities made in this shinobi world. There were truly some monsters out there, and I honestly wondered how much longer I could survive. A month had now passed since that night, and the war was coming to an end. The Hidden Stone had signed a peace treaty with the Hidden Leaf. This prompted all of the other nations to come to a ceasefire, bringing the war to a steady close. Smaller skirmishes were still taking place among some of the great nations. However, the Land of Water was starting to develop its own internal problems. There was question that the Mizukichi's leadership in the war was the cause of so much death among the ranks. The nobles and even the feudal lord were calling for the Mizukichi to step down. It was chaos, and civil war was on the horizon. Troops and units were leaving the Hidden Mist and going to whoever paid them best. Assassination attempts were being made on the Mizukichi and nobles alike. I found myself in a difficult position. I had been raised in the Land of Water, and was a fully fledged mist ninja. There was nowhere else I could go without becoming a rogue ninja, and I was sworn to serve the Mizukichi as a hunter ninja. Small-scale skirmishes were being fought between lords and other powerful leaders in the Land of Water, and it was not looking good. The few remaining clans and KekkaiGenkai users left from the war were being hired and sought for their power. However, it did not bode well with the civilians of the Land of Water, as they became so feared for their abilities that anyone with the KekkaiGenkai was seen as a monster and killed. I and others who served the Mizukichi were safe enough inside the village, but the same could not be said for those outside of its protection. Even my own clan had fallen, with so many of its warriors being killed or away on missions. Those who were left were defenseless. I was away on a mission when it happened, and there was nothing I could do. Even my mother in this world had been killed. The surviving members fled and spread around the Land of Water, keeping their abilities a secret just like the Anaim had foretold. Some clans proved too strong to be taken down by mercenaries or large hordes of villagers, one being the Kagaya clan. They thrived on bloodlust in battle, and after a handful of skirmishes, they were left to their own devices. 6 months went by before something large enough to bring the civil war to an end happened. The third Mizukichi passed away, and the fighting was put on hold to see who would be elected as the new Mizukichi. Only the most powerful shinobi were even considered to become the Mizukichi, and at the moment there was one that stood out among the rest. Yugurukare Itachi. He was well known for his efforts in the war, demonstrating his superior abilities and strength. It was the fact that he had become the first user of the three tails, and learned to master his power in such a short amount of time, that stood above the rest. With his already impressive abilities and the power of the three tails at his side, he quickly brought the civil war to a halt, and rallied many to his side. He was crowned the Yonde Mizukichi, which meant the fourth water shadow, or fourth Mizukichi. Yugura had no tolerance for any form of treachery against the village, and anyone who dared betray him was killed. This enforced the nickname that was given to our village as the Bloody Mist, and seemed to boost our reputation. He ruled with an iron fist, doing what he thought best for the Hidden Mist and his people. He even ended the brutal academy tradition of having to compete in a bloody battle just to become a ninja. Instead, we adopted a more humane approach with a graduation exam consisting of no killing. Once the new genin had passed out of the academy, they were placed into teams under Chunin or Jounin, much like the Hidden Leaf. The aim was to rebuild our numbers rather than have them kill each other like in the past. Some argued that the quality of our military might would decrease, but most were glad to see the barbaric ritual ended. Yugura had forced all of the nobles and lords into submission with his strength and power. No one dared challenge him, and it seemed that a temporary peace filled the land. Yugura seemed like the kind of man you wanted to follow. He was powerful, smart, and he cared for his people. The first 6 months of his rule seemed to bring prosperity to the Land of Water and Hidden Mist. But that soon changed. During the 6 months that had passed, I had been assigned to the elite hunter ninja squad that fell directly below the 7 ninja swordsmen of the mist, who were second only to the Mizukichi himself. Zabuza had also climbed the ranks and was placed in the same unit as me, earning the title of the Demon of the Hidden Mist. He too had survived everything that had been thrown at him, from large-scale conflicts in the war, to suicide missions given to him. What made it more impressive was that, unlike me, he possessed no KekkaiGenkai. There was one other that I recognized who was a part of our unit. It was Kisame Hashigaki. He was about 5 years older than me, making him 16, and boy was his strength impressive. Even without the famous Samehada, he was still a dangerous opponent. My memory of when or even how he would get Samehada was too hazy to remember, and meant I could only wait for things to play out as they were going to. The current members of the 7 ninja swordsmen of the mist were as follows. Kaguki Tsukazin, who possessed Samehada, Jinin Akabino, who possessed Kabudaori the Helmet Splitter, Kushimera Kuraira, who had an Ibari, Rigakure, who was also known as the Thunder of the Hidden Mist. He possessed the Thunder Swords Kiba, JKZM Biwa, who I had met a few years ago while still in training. He possessed the Kubikura, also known as the Executioner's Blade and Zabuza's future weapon. As for the last 2 members, I had no information on them, and had never even seen them before. Each of us in the unit was placed under direct orders from one of the 7, and given a small unit to whom we were in command of. My unit consisted of 3 chunin, 2 of whom were girls and 2 jounin. It was a little awkward at first due to my age. The others were all at least 15 and above, but they had heard the stories of my abilities, which had earned me the title of Devil of the Hidden Mist, a nickname in which case I had no choice in choosing. I took orders from Rigakure directly, and found him to be a bloodthirsty killer like most of the other swordsmen of the Bloody Mist. He wouldn't think twice about killing someone at random, but when he did, he always showed sorrow. It was completely crazy. The first time I and my unit accompanied him on a mission, he killed one of the chunin, just because he didn't like the way he smelled. I had to fight every fiber in my body not to object, but knew no good would come from it. After all, he ranked below only the Mizukichi and would only result in a battle to the death. Still, he seemed to take a liking to me and my abilities, and one day had summoned me to a training field alone, which I felt very uneasy about. Still, with all the missions I had been on, my personnel development had been put on hold due to lack of free time to train. I arrived at the training field as instructed, wearing my training gear and headband around my head. I was the first to arrive and walked over to the large stream that flowed through the particular grassy area. I picked up some of the water with my hands and looked at my reflection before taking a drink. My hair had grown in the last year, and I had even tied the right band in a ponytail, much like how I remember Kamimuro's hair to be like. After all, we were from the same bloodline, and the only difference was that my hair was black. Suddenly I felt a surge of electricity in the air, and ducked only to see a blade pass a few millimeters above my head. I sprang backwards onto my hands, pushing off them and flipping onto my feet, ready for what was to come next. It was Rigakure, and he was stood with one sword over his shoulder and the other in his hand beside his leg. "You did well to dodge that. You would be dead if you hadn't," he said, a grin on his face. I bit my tongue and didn't reply. I was confident in the strength of my bones, but the Kiba swords used the lightning style to amp their cutting power, and they could cut through pretty much anything. "You can relax, kid. If I wanted to kill you, you would be dead already," he said as he put away his Kiba blades. I only half relaxed as I was unsure whether or not he would attack again. Turns out I was right to trust my instincts. Not a second after, he threw a kunai enhanced by lightning style charka, and it was aimed right for my chest. It was coming too fast for me to dodge, and instead I overloaded my chakra into my sternum and chest wall, creating a thick layer of armored bone. The kunai struck me hard in the chest, causing me to slide back along the soft ground, but not fall over. The kunai blade had pierced my skin, and only the first layer of bone that I had created to protect myself. If not for the lightning enhancement, the blade would have bounced right off of me. Raigo whistled and seemed impressed. "Damn kid, that's some impressive defense right there. You were able to stop a lightning enhanced kunai from shredding right through you. Anyone else would be dead right now." I didn't really understand where he was going with all of this. After all, he was pretty much the first person to take such an interest in my abilities. Most others usually left me to my own devices or were too afraid to ask. "I understand this ability of yours is of the Kekkaigen clan. I have to say it's the first time I am seeing it in person." I nodded and pulled the kunai out of my chest, throwing it to the ground. "So why are we here?" I asked, speaking for the first time. Raigo smiled and crossed his arms. "I like to test all of my direct subordinates this way, but I have to say you are the first to survive this far." I wasn't even shocked to hear that. It was no hidden fact that the 7 swordsmen pretty much did what they wanted. "Now I want you to show me what you are made of. And if I like what I see, then who knows, maybe I will teach you a trick or two." I nodded in agreement as I thought about the severity of what this match would have in store. It could easily result in one of us dying, and that would most likely be me. "To give you a fighting chance, I won't use my Kiba blades. How does that sound?" he said, gesturing to the blades that were sheathed on his back. I nodded in agreement and took a fighting stance. This was a rare opportunity to test my true strength against a most likely superior opponent. One that did not happen often in the Hidden Mist without resulting in one's death. Raiga pulled out two kunai, one in each hand as he took a low stance, a sinister grin across his face, his large lips making it even more sinister. I took my fighting stance and extended my arms out to my side, palms open facing my opponent. I allowed bones to protrude from my skin all around my body. I had come to allow two bones to protrude from my forehead like horns, which is where the nickname Devil of the Mist had come from. Raiga made the first move and charged in, crossing his arms in an X shape over his face. He was fast, and seemed to easily shift what direction he was traveling and making it hard to predict his movements. He started to run in a circle around me, and it was honestly starting to make me a little dizzy trying to keep track of him. Suddenly he launched forward at me, pushing off his back leg and jumping in the air, spinning rapidly. Lightning-infused chakra became visible on his kunai, and it looked like a tornado of lightning was headed right for me. I jumped high into the air, avoiding the double slash attack he had aimed at me, and flipped upside down, firing my bone bullets out of my fingertips as I did. Raiga was able to deflect them, and with the lightning enhancement around his kunai, they could take the impact where normally they would have broken. He was on me the instant I touched the ground, but I had already planned for this. Blocking each of his kunai with my bone blades, he no longer had any protection, and I allowed my ribcage to grow, almost impaling him as it did. I pressed forward, not having much to worry about, realizing that my bones were more than strong enough to engage with his lightning kunai. We exchanged blows, but I was starting to gain the advantage in this Jujutsu match. I had learned to incorporate a lot of acrobatic movements into my frightening style. Along with my enhanced strength and chakra control, these movements were no strain to perform at all. The reason I had incorporated these movements into my fighting style was so that I could take advantage of my entire body being a weapon. Combining it with my KekkaiGenkai, my agility and unlimited ways I could use my body as a weapon was extremely overwhelming to most. It was very similar to Killer Bee's fighting style with his 8 blades. However, I could use almost an unlimited amount of blades from anywhere on my body. I forced Raiga on the defensive, and pretty soon I could tell he was starting to grow frustrated. He jumped backwards and started weaving hand signs, landing on the stream of water as he did. Suddenly a huge water dragon fired from the large stream and was headed right for me like a missile. The water dragon jutsu was a very powerful water style, and only very skilled shinobi could use it. Little did Raiga know my abilities gave me a huge control over the water element, and he was about to find out why. Quickly weaving my own hand signs, I created a huge ice mirror in front of me that absorbed the water dragon jutsu. Raiga was extremely surprised, but not as surprised when his own water dragon hit him in the back, knocking him off of his feet and sending him crashing into the ground hard. When I had first learned to use the crystal ice mirrors technique, I had to travel from mirror to mirror. It allowed me to travel so fast between them that it seemed like I was teleporting. But with time I had discovered that I could link them, allowing me to connect them like doors. This increased the speed I could use them and also the effectiveness. And with a bit of fine-tuning of the crystal ice mirrors jutsu, I could allow other objects to travel through the mirrors other than myself. Creating a second mirror behind Raiga, I was able to send his water dragon through one mirror and out of the other, using his attack against him. He slowly got back up to his feet, and the fact he was drenched made the feat even harder. That attack, it was like the Mizukage's, but he stopped and unsheathed both of his kibble blades from his back. I guess I underestimated you, kid. You're not normal, he said enraged as he raised both of the swords into the air, crossing the blades together. Blue sparks of electricity began to form, and the air around him was charged with energy. Lightning ball, he shouted as he fired a large ball made of crackling electricity. I jumped out of the way and was able to avoid the attack, but suddenly more of the same was fired at me in rapid succession. As fast as I was still unable to avoid all of the attacks, and one of them struck me in the back. I could feel the electricity surge through my body. It was so painful it felt like I was about to pass out. Turns out I had no way of countering lightning style at the moment, as I had been lucky enough to never really encounter someone who used it in battle. I dropped to the floor and was left gasping for air. Raiga walked over and pointed his blade at me. "It's over, kid," he said as he sheathed his swords. I got back up to my feet slowly, but my legs were still a little numb, and I fell back onto my behind. Raiga laughed at me and crossed his arms over his chest. "You know, kid, you came pretty close. I had to pull out all the stops to beat you, and that's saying something. It's not every day that one of the 7 swordsmen of the mist compliments you, so you better accept it." I was finally able to stand once the feeling in my legs returned, and I took his hand as he helped me up. "Now here's a little reward for not dying against me," Raiga said as he handed me a piece of paper. It was a piece of charcoal paper, like the one we had been given in the academy to see what element affinity we could use. Of course, mine had been water and wind thanks to my KekkaiGenkai. I gave him a questioning look and he laughed. "Now here's a little tip. When you focus your chakra into the paper, try and imagine the surge of electricity you felt from that attack in your hand." I put the pieces together and realized he was trying to test to see if I could use lightning style. I did as he said and focused my chakra into the paper, trying to remember the surge of electricity as I did. To my surprise, the paper wrinkled in my hand and Raiga gave me a large slap on the back. "Well, looks like you have an affinity for lightning style after all, kid." I was pretty impressed, to be honest, and the possibilities of its implications into my already existing arsenal were flooding my mind. "Will you teach me to use it?" I asked. Raiga gave a small grin, but then shook his head. Afraid not, kid, you're going to have to figure this one out by yourself. If you wish to get stronger, then that is your current mission. I will give you one tip though. When using a lightning style, you have to have intense focus, and then will your charka to mold into lightning. With that said, he turned his back and walked off into the ever-present mist of the Bloody Mist village, leaving me to my own devices. I looked at the palm of my hand and focused an intense amount of chakra into it. Doing as he had said, I willed it to turn into lightning just like with the paper. A small crackle of electricity sparked around my hand, and then quickly faded as fast as it had come. I could certainly say that the next few weeks to come would be exciting, to say the least. Now that I had something new to focus on and become stronger, all I had to do next was figure out what to use my power for in this shinobi world. And that concludes the first episode. If you enjoyed it, I'd seriously love it if you guys could leave a like on the video, as it genuinely helps out so much, and it keeps me going, plus it takes only 1 second. That said, have a wonderful day. God bless.